we are live. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for bearing with us. We always have challenges setting up this show. Seems like things change every single time I do this. How are you, Georgi?
I'm fine. Hi, everybody.
Okay, we don't have a ton of stuff to go over today. You know, we're going to go over the vitamin E paper. We're going to go over the study that Georgi funded himself with progesterone and DHEA, aka Cortinon. And so let me switch screens here. Do that, and then we'll get into some other fun stuff, and we'll probably take calls as well, I think, just to spice things up, because those are always fun. So, and we'll probably do that towards the end, and then we'll take super chats at the very end. But Georgi, do you want to go through the study?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned already several times on the podcast that I did a study with Cortinon Plus. We call it Cortinon Plus because the ratio of progesterone to DHEA is 8-1, instead of the regular one we sell, which is 3-1. And we tested it on a very highly lethal murine leukemia. So basically, it's a type of blood cancer that is caused by a virus, and it's known as for being 100% transplantable, which means once the animal gets injected with the virus, it develops the cancer without any exceptions, and it's 100% lethal. Nothing is known so far to be able to stop it or even delay it. So we did the study with Cortinon, and basically, as the study demonstrates, Cortinon essentially doubled the lifespan of the animals with this virus, and more importantly, the animals that got pre-treated with Cortinon before getting injected with the virus, they were extremely resilient to infection, which is something that the team had never seen before. Like I said, it's supposed to be 100% transplantable tumor. In other words, you inject the animal and it develops it, right? And if you look at the graph, you'll see it's in the study. You'll see that basically one animal required 19 consecutive days of inoculations before he could actually develop the cancer. Mm-hmm. And at least for this specific cancer, it's unheard of. So the team who did the study thinks that if nothing else, Cortinon can be a very solid preventative agent for this kind of cancer, and probably for any cancer, because this cancer, the reason they focus on it is because it's so lethal and so hard to treat that any inroads you make, into treating that kind of cancer, they think that, for other less dangerous, for less lethal and less invasive and aggressive ones, it will be a much bigger, much stronger result. So when I called the scientist and I asked them, like, so what's your takeaway from the study? And they said, well, it's 100% solid preventative agent. And two of the animals actually survived over the 60-day period, but their ethical guidelines for conducting the study, and once you infect these animals, once they develop a tumor of a certain size, and you have to specify that the study would last, let's say, like 60 days, right? Mm. And then at the end of the 60th day, even if they're animals that are still surviving, you have to euthanize them, and they did. But I think it was 3 animals in the Cortinon group that were actually alive after the 60th day, but the study had to be terminated. Mm-hmm. So we don't know. They could have lived. I'm actually getting huge static. Oh,
are you?
When you move the microphone.
Okay, my fault.
Yeah. So we could have had 3 out of 10 animals potentially living much longer, but the protocol called for euthanasia at the end of the 60th day, so that's what happened. So basically doubled the. I would say almost completely prevented the inoculation with cancer, because every single animal in the Cortinon pretreatment group required multiple injections of the virus in order to develop the cancer. One of them required 19 of them. Mm-hmm. And then on average, I think they require between 6 and 7. So compared to only 1 for the control group. So strong preventative effect, and doubling of the lifespan. Again, something that hasn't been seen with any other agent before, any other chemical, any other intervention. And 3 out of the 10 animals in one of the Cortinon groups were still alive at the end, but they had to be euthanized. So potentially they could have been 30% cure rate, but I asked for them to let the animals live, but it was considered unethical.
And just before we move on, what is your hypothesis of why progesterone or DHEA are protective against cancer in general?
We actually did some blood tests. Unfortunately, they couldn't do them for all the groups. That's why they're not in the study. But of course, I wanted to check things like lactate dehydrogenase and the pyruvate to lactate ratio. And basically, the lactate dehydrogenase was 17 times higher than normal in the control group that received nothing except getting the tumor. And then it was trending, it was basically almost normal in the animals that were receiving cortisone. So the Warburg effect was basically heavily, buffered, was heavily restricted, and now we're seeing these studies that the Warburg effect is really also a cause of cancer. And also there are other studies that show that progesterone can deplete, reduce glutathione, and raise the levels of the oxidized one. And the reduced glutathione GSH is one of the primary protective mechanisms for cancer cells. They actually hoard it up as if it's gold, and that's what protects them from the reactive oxygen species and from apoptosis. So if you deplete the reduced glutathione, if you convert it into the oxidized version, basically many times the tumor cells will undergo apoptosis on their own. In one group, we managed to measure GSH, and it did drop. Basically, it was still higher than normal, but again, like the control group, they had nothing except the tumor. The ratio of GSH to GSSG rose to about, I think, 5 or 6, and the normal is about 2 to 1. And then in the actual cortisone groups, that ratio dropped down to 3 to 1. So it was almost normalized. So if nothing else, we have a confirmation that the metabolic parameters and the change in metabolic parameters are consistent with cancer being a metabolic disease, because the therapeutic effect was associated with a reversal of these parameters, shifting the redox balance towards oxidation.
Yeah, and that's something I love that Ray has talked about, and we've talked about many times, is like those very specific markers that are testable, like the pyruvate to lactic acid, the NAD to NADH, and then I always get this wrong, but the glutathione to oxidized glutathione, or the other way around?
Either way, basically, you want it, if you do GSH to GSSG, you want the ratio to be lower, right? But if you do it the other way around, GSSG to the GSH, you want it to be higher. So as long as you test these two, the reduced and the oxidized version, then you can, calculate whichever ratio you want. But, and then you can compare it to what that specific ratio is in a sick or like a healthy organism, and you can see which direction your chemical is shifting the balance toward.
And the glutathione goes up in a dividing cell. Is that like a form of protection because of the reduced state?
Yes, basically because the reduced state, and it's the GSH, because the organism views very rapidly dividing cells with suspicion, rightfully so, right? And the way it keeps them under control is that there are multiple signals through which the organism can actually intervene and use these T killer cells to basically like kill cells that are refusing to stop the division process, right? But it's been shown that when the cell is in a heavily reduced state, when it's overloaded with GSH, that signal, first of all, it doesn't always get to the immune cells, and second of all, the immune cells themselves have a problem dealing with cells that are in a heavily reduced state. They're much more resilient to autophagy and to the response of the immune system. So yeah, and actually, if you shift the redox balance back towards oxidation, in other words, if the pH drops, that is often enough, depending on how much the pH drops in a cell, intracellular pH. That is in and of itself a sufficient signal for the cell to undergo apoptosis. And that's why drugs like acetazolamide are very helpful, because they actually lower the intracellular pH. And if the cell is abnormal, if it's already mutated, which is a result of the metabolic derangement, not a cause of it, right? If the cell is mutated and it's abnormal, then this drop of pH will be a signal for the cell to sort of like, become aware of itself and commit suicide, for lack of a better word.
I love it. Awesome. Okay, let me change here. Okay, so I should note that Georgi, proprietor of idealabsdc.com, so go check out those. He makes boutique custom supplements there. You can follow him at twitter.com/hateit, and he is a prolific poster there. I have coaching on DannyRoddy.com/resources. You can follow me on Twitter, and I have an Instagram related to, I mostly post food things on there, and you can check that out. and that is the number to call, but please don't call yet.
Because he'll hang up on you.
Well, it gets really complicated when people are calling in, and then we will take all the super chats at the end, and I appreciate it a lot, guys. So thank you. Okay, let's get back to this view. And what article did you feel like was a good opener? I have the vitamin E can treat and cure severe fatty liver disease.
That's actually pretty interesting because I saw that one because I spend my days scouring PubMed and reading new stuff. So every once in a while I would like basically type tocopherols in the search box for chemicals that are really like pillars of Piterianism. So I'll periodically check on what new research is coming out about them. So I was searching for tocopherols and I saw this study on PubMed. So if you look basically over the last 2 or 3 days, this actual study actually hit the mainstream. So now it's on Eureka Alert, it's on like New Scientist or whatnot. I think it's already been posted on Reddit, but I think it's a pretty big deal because so far, at least according to mainstream medicine, there is no treatment, let alone, I mean, there's nothing to slow it down. There's no prevention, and there's definitely no treatment known for the two types of fatty liver disease, NAFLD and NASH, right? And this study showed that vitamin E can actually reverse that in highly compromised people, in HIV patients. And I think that underscores even more just how therapeutic vitamin E is, because HIV patients already have compromised liver function, and they're having, because of their compromised energetic state, it's much more difficult for them to recover, right? If this was a study in like people that just had like hepatitis, or they drank too much, or like they were eating too much fat, and vitamin E reversed it, it would have been a great result. But in those people, it wouldn't be that much of a surprise because the liver has the ability to recover. In HIV patients, the liver is already heavily damaged. So, and then they can't really muster up the recovery response because of the energetic demands. So the fact that vitamin E was safe and effective, which is, I'm quoting the actual authors of the study, I think it, to me, is like a huge news, huge win for vitamin E. And in general, for the idea that polyunsaturated fats are bad, because that is the mechanism of vitamin E in the liver. It has no other known mechanism except that, and also the opposition to estrogen.
Well, I was going to say, how do you think it's, we kind of went over it, but how do you think it's being liver protective or reversing those changes?
Well, actually, the study that over there says as well, like the lipid peroxidation is highly elevated in HIV patients, right? Mm-hmm. And my second guess is estrogen, because we know that estrogen is bad for the liver. It causes liver enlargement. It causes fattening up of the liver. Mm-hmm. Even though in the bloodstream, actually, if your estrogen is high, your blood glucose will be lower. And people think this is a great thing, but it's not. Actually, it's the effects of estrogen is fattening up the liver by increasing fatty acid oxidation. So basically, estrogen increases lipolysis and increases the oxidation of fat, but whatever cannot be oxidized has to go somewhere. And through the reesterification process, which is done by the liver, basically the liver is exposed to this influx of fatty acids. So if they're PUFA, the liver pays the price, and it's especially true in HIV patients.
Yeah. Speaking of esterification, and this is a little bit off topic. Have you gotten into methyl glyoxal at all? Like,
I haven't seen it, but I know Travis on the forum used to post a lot about it.
I've accumulated some responses from Ray about it, and that being mostly, I know it can be formed from lactic acid, but also it can be formed from the breakdown of the triglycerides, the glycerol. And again, I don't want to derail this show, but that's like another bad part about liberating the free fatty acids, is that the glycerol, I guess, is one of the main substrates for the production of methyl glyoxal, which is like apparently extremely toxic.
Yeah, and it's elevating diabetes. That much is it's actually one of the biomarkers of diabetes, and it's elevated years before you can get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So they're trying to develop like an official biomarker. It's not officially approved, but doctors know that it's a biomarker for diabetes type 2, and they will test you for it. So if yours are elevated, even if you're normal weight and you look healthy, they'll advise you to like watch your weight and watch what you're eating, because you're on your on your way to becoming diabetic.
And I guess I forgot my original point for bringing that up, but that is the precursor to the advanced glycation end products. And so again, that is it's such a common belief that sugar leads to the advanced glycation end products, but it appears that the glycerol from the free fatty acids is like even bigger promoter.
Exactly. So nobody's denying that sugar can contribute, but it's actually the byproducts of the polyunsaturated fats that can actually do it about 20 to 25 times more effectively, more efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got Andrew Kim, who used to blog. I think he said fructose does contribute to it, and I think lactic acid does even more. But again, it's like that small nuance that often doesn't get talked about. Okay, what
did we talk about the aspirin for a broken heart? And
we never talked about it.
I think this is a great study because it did use aspirin, didn't use salt, but it used a beta blocker. So I put salt there because that's we know how the beta blockers work, right? They block the effects of adrenaline. So another way, a dietary method of doing that is by increasing salt, right? Progesterone should be able to do it as well because progesterone also has an anti-adrenergic effect as well. So long story short, there is this thing called the Takotsubo syndrome, and it's Japanese doctors were the first ones to actually study this more objectively, more formally, and they kept telling, they kept presenting things at conferences in the 60s and 70s saying like, look, you can actually die of broken heart. And the Western media was like, you guys are crazy. What kind of voodoo magic is this? Like, what do you mean you can die from a broken heart? So saying, no, seriously, you can actually get a type of cardiomyopathy, which is very unique, and we've only seen it in people who grieve or who've undergone some kind of a tremendous emotional stress. So up until today, Takotsubo syndrome, I don't think is officially recognized by Western medicine. They know about it. It's part of the lingo, but as an actual disease, I don't think you can get diagnosed with Takotsubo syndrome in a Western hospital. They may give you another diagnosis, but they'll refuse to make the link between the emotional state and being the actual cause of this heart problem. Basically a study looked at what happens when people grieve, and it could be like, a loved one dying, or you can be going under, through a divorce. You can be like a really nasty breakup. Post-traumatic stress disorder will be another thing that will, qualifies as a traumatic, event that can affect the heart. So long story short, they found out that basically after, I think like the year, for the full year after this event, you have a dramatically increased risk of heart attack and or stroke, and very interestingly, basically you can get so basically for the next year or so you can get AFib, which is the atrial fibrillation. And I think many people in the United States, I don't know how long you haven't been there, but basically there are these advertisements all over TV, and they're advertising drugs for AFib, and they're treating it with a blood thinner, right? But I dug deeper into it, and I noticed that basically Takotsubo syndrome is thought to be caused by estrogen. As a result of stress, estrogen rises, and this is actually on the Wikipedia page. Estrogen rises, and it causes the release of adrenaline and cortisol, and those two hormones directly cause the cardiomyopathy known as broken heart syndrome, right? But that thing is nowhere in your, and actually, and I made the connection, okay, so it's estrogen that's probably causing the AFib, right? Because those studies that looked at the Takotsubo syndrome said that as part of this, the syndrome that you're developing, you're also getting AFib. So it's, but when I've talked to doctors about it, they said, no, there's no way AFib is hormonally driven. It's probably a genetic thing, like you have like some kind of a malfunction in the valve, right? Or something else is going on, but there's no way their hormones are involved. Yet, at least when it comes to the broken heart syndrome, estrogen, it's very much hormonally related, and estrogen, adrenaline, and cortisol are involved. And aspirin, together with a beta blocker, was shown to fully reverse it. So if you don't want to take the beta blocker, I will do aspirin and salt. If you don't like the salt, then aspirin and progesterone. And since estrogen and cortisol are so heavily involved, and progesterone can antagonize both and also adrenaline, maybe progesterone by itself would be fully sufficient. I didn't put this in the post, but now I'm thinking that estrogen can actually antagonize all three. So it could be a treatment for this syndrome as well.
This is semi-related. I'm kicking myself for not being able to find it, but do you remember Pranarupa? Like, I think he pretty much left the internet.
Phil.
Yeah, Phil. But like, he had an article on the heart, and I remember a footnote in there, or a link, was that people that got heart transplants started to take on the characteristics of the people that gave them the transplant. And I remember going through those articles, and it was like, great. Do you have a theory on that? Like, why that is?
Well, I mean, the cells that are basically, you take an organ from another person, and that organ carries with itself a field. So basically, it overlaps with your own field of your other organs. And actually, there are studies with so-called multi-organ transplants, and they've shown that eventually you become a mix of the personalities of all of the different people that you took organs from. There's actually a study, no, it's not a study, it's a horror movie from, like, I think early 90s, where this serial killer was executed, and then all of the organs of the serial killer were getting transplanted to other people, including the head, right? So clearly the person who got the head became a serial killer as well. But the other people who got the heart or the kidneys or the liver, they started displaying psychopathic tendencies as well. So, I mean, part of it is hormonal. I mean, basically, if you take the heart from a person, it's going to carry their hormonal balance. So, if you take a heart from a psychopath, it will probably you'll have high levels of serotonin and estrogen, right? And then whether these get reset once the heart gets put in, it very much depends on basically a cellular quorum. So in order for your cells to overwhelm the cells in the whatever organ you're getting externally, it all comes down to energy. And if the cells of the organ that you're getting are more energetically effective, they may impose very likely may impose themselves and set a new quorum. So even though you're physically your old self, energetically and electromagnetically, you're not. You're basically you're resonating with the new organ. So now that is your new resonating frequency. You become this other person.
I have something semi-related. When I asked Ray about reincarnation a long time ago, because somebody turned me on to, I think his name is Ian Stevenson, and he had a book called like 10 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. And again, I don't have some motivation to believe that this concept is real or anything, but the Ian had gone to like or like native peoples or early native peoples, and found that like little kids could perfectly do Russian dances, that like 17th century Russian dances, like things that there would be no possible way that a child would know. And then one was like as elaborate as a kid having a remembering a life before, and then being able to like identify the killer of the person, just like these really elaborate memories, and then being substantiated by going to the place and the kid knowing where the locations were. And I won't read the whole thing, but Ray said that substances are always participating in particular situations or fields and are never merely random. And then he ends it with the idea of resonance needs a better understanding of substance as incorporating its fields, and nothing has private independent fields. And so that trends into the William James radical empiricism, that everything is changing because I guess every field is affecting every other field. And so I'm far away from understanding it, but I did think that was pretty interesting.
I mean, basically, if you get other organs from other people, you're getting part of that person, and it's like part of it. So you become the average, for lack of a better word. But it's not really the average. It's actually it shifts the balance. So if that new organ is energetically more sound, and this has been shown in animals, you start exhibiting more of the characteristics of that other person or that other organism from which the organ came. And if conversely your cells are energetically stronger, for lack of a better word, then basically that organ gets incorporated into your field and then starts resonating into your field, versus you resonating with the foreign field from that person that the organ came from.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder how like taking those immunosuppressive drugs, what is the result and the push and pull between the new organ and the person isn't it common that a person will have to take immunosuppressive drugs for life?
For the rest of their life, yeah.
So
exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, let me. We can move on, but let me just open this. And so, obviously, February 21st, I have Mr. Georgi Dinkov on. February 28th, I'm going to have Tim Burzens on, and I've been Amplified Vitality, very smart fellow. And Tim and I have a commonality that a low carb person has both made videos on both of us, and so we're going to talk about that. I'm going to. I don't know Tim's story, so we're going to go over that, and then probably just riff on a few subjects. And March 6th. Everybody cross your fingers, but it's going to be Mr. Georgi Dinkov and Mr. Ray Pete, and so that should be very fun, hopefully that happens. I don't have any reason to suspect that it would not happen, but I'm very excited. And then March 13th, I will finally do a Q&A just by myself, and I had to move it last week? Because I had a conflict with a one-to-one. Okay, that is out of the way. Let's jump back to... should we take like a call?
If you want. I mean, did we talk about the ALS?
Okay, yeah.
That basically that responded to riboflavin. This is a really interesting one because they basically this girl, I think she was 16 years old, 18-year-old. So she was diagnosed with ALS, right? But then she didn't have all of the symptoms, and then they basically treated her with riboflavin. And she responded dramatically. So she went from bedridden and about to die to a fully functional adult. Now she still had some symptoms, remaining. I think basically she had trouble using one of her legs, but she went again from bedridden and potentially fully paralyzed to essentially a fully functioning, independently functioning adult. And because she responded to riboflavin, they thought like this. If you look at the study, it's like written in a very apologetic way. They're kind of like doing everything possible to not say that ALS is treatable by riboflavin. They're like, well, it's probably this rare genetic case of riboflavin transporter deficiency. But you know what? We tested her and she wasn't deficient. Mm-hmm. So we don't know what it is, but it cannot be ALS because ALS is irreversible. Yet to the very end, and still, I guess, her official diagnosis is ALS. Mm. So they actually effectively, I guess for a lack of a better word, they cured ALS by administering high doses of riboflavin and effectively restoring the functioning of the of her metabolism, especially the electron transport chain complex, for which riboflavin is a precursor to one of the enzymes that's very important, the flavin adenine dinucleotide, FAD. Mm-hmm. Just by pumping her full of riboflavin, the dosages were similar to what they used to treat migraines. So it wasn't something completely, insane that you can only get into the hospital. I think the dosage will be about, I know people think it's very high, like about 600 to 800 milligrams daily, mm-hmm. but that's what they use to treat migraines, and it's been shown to be, so far no serious side effects, despite like hundreds of trials already being done. So I think that's another confirmation that ALS is actually a mitochondrial/metabolic disease. And I put some links into my post about a few years ago. I posted another one showing that copper dissolved in DMSO can actually treat ALS, and they're trying to patent this formulation right now, even though you can get it over the counter. I mean, you can make it yourself at home. And there was another study which showed that lithium may potentially also treat ALS. And what all of these three things, like the riboflavin, the lithium, and the copper, have in common is that they stimulate oxidative phosphorylation, and specifically the activity of the electron transport chain fraction of it.
Just in relation to cytochrome deoxidase, I think a grounding thing for why PUFA is harmful, maybe like an easy, at least I always try to understand things in a really simple way. But there was a paper, and this is a paraphrase of the paper, but it was like PUFA and mitochondrial cardiolipin are attacked by mitochondria producing RS. Cardiolipin is the most sensitive to the ROS-induced peroxidation. This means that its peroxidation initiates a chain reaction, setting on fire other membrane constituents. But anyways, that's just one article talking about how PUFA displace cardiolipin and then slow down cytochrome deoxidase, because I guess cardiolipin is like palmitic acid, so it's highly saturated. And so that ties into what you're talking about, because it slows down the electron transport chain, backs up the electrons, and they participate in all these harmful reactions.
Yeah. Well, your cardiolipin starts as being mostly composed of saturated fats when you're born, mm-hmm. but with age, its composition, because it's a lipid, its composition changes. And it's been shown that feeding animals fully hydrogenated fats, I think Ray actually put this in one of his articles too, reverses that change and actually changes the composition of the cardiolipin back to its saturated state to what it was when we were babies. And it's cardiolipin which stabilizes cytochrome C oxidase, and without, basically, if the cardiolipin is peroxidized, then cytochrome C oxidase it can be in a state, it can be deactivated almost as well as if nitric oxide was bound to it.
Yeah, somebody gave us heat last week, and they were saying we should be more clear about fat, and so we're pro saturated fat. We're highly skeptical / anti-PUFA. But again, there's like I don't know, how would you parse that with somebody who is maybe ill? Like I guess I think the major approach is that there are people promoting really large amounts of fat. So even if it was saturated fat, do you think there's a benefit to composing most of your nutrition from saturated fat? Do you think that's from a metabolic point of view that's useful?
Well, it's less harmful than eating PUFA, right? And it could be a step towards improving health and ultimately switching back to carbs. So look, I mean, per unit of oxygen consumed, carbs produce more carbon dioxide. So that's probably one of the main reasons. There are other reasons too. Unlike fats, carbs are not signaling substances, or at least not as much. Well, the function of fat is not just the fuel. I mean, first of all, they get stored in your tissue, right? And actually, it's the amount of fat that determines the expression of the enzyme aromatase. And even if you're eating almost entirely, I mean, even if you're eating purely saturated fat, if you're gaining fat, you will be expressing more aromatase. There's no question about it. Also, just the structure of the fat determines whether you'll be in an estrogen dominant state, in other words, in a state of dedifferentiation and division or not. The more unsaturated the fat, the more water your cells will absorb. So fats have signaling function, and it's really not a good idea to mess with them. So even with the saturated fats, they're more inert, right? They don't have these functions, and actually they're known to do a number of beneficial things, such as activate the GABA receptor, which is one reason why when the ketogenic diet is done for controlling epilepsy, it only works if you actually do ketosis with saturated fats. If you try corn oil, it actually makes the epilepsy much worse. So that's one thing that you never hear the keto community talking about it, right? It's all about like, oh, it's the ketosis that's doing it. No, it's only if the ketones are coming from saturated fat. And basically, so they activate the GABA receptor. They also they terminate the stress response. So once you get the adrenal system activated, the HPA axis, it's been shown that the saturated fats can actually turn off both the CRH and the ACTH release, while the PUFA have the exact opposite effect. And in fact, they've been shown to be able to trigger cortisol release even in the absence of the CRH from the hypothalamus and ACTH. So they have a direct pro-stress effect. So anyways, long story short, first, the goal, if you're in a really PUFA dominant state, I think there is some benefit to changing that balance in favor of saturated fat. And maybe if you want to eat more saturated fat, high fat diet for a few months to change that balance in favor of saturated fat, I don't think that's a bad thing. But if that's your goal, to only be oxidizing fat, I don't think this is a good idea, because ultimately you won't be synthesizing as much CO2. And second of all, if you are oxidizing chronically fat, that is still like the primordial stress signal. Your body it works at a very basic level. When you oxidize carbs, this is basically a sign that the times are good, because carbs, when they come from inside of your body, they come from a very toxic process, which is the gluconeogenesis, which releases ammonia. And the body knows that whether you're getting them dietary or not. So if you're getting carbs from your diet, that is a signal that the environment is beneficial, and it's not going to destroy you, right? It's friendly. When you're oxidizing fat, as I posted on that blog post, which we discussed last time, that the keto diet only works for 1 week, and afterwards it makes you diabetic. That study has a quote which says, when you're oxidizing fat, the body interprets this as if you're in a mode of starvation, even though technically you're not. But that's the signal you're sending. And if you're sending that signal, then you start the whole cascade of turning off non-vital functions such as reproduction, creativity, like the prefrontal cortex, all kinds of things that the body thinks are not needed. So you go back to your, lizard brain, and you start operating on a much more primitive level energetically. So yeah, there is a benefit to eating high-fat diet for a few months, and trying to shift the balance that is inside of your fatty tissue from polyunsaturated towards saturated. But once that is established, and you can actually do some blood tests for that. There's a test for lipid peroxidation, malondialdehyde. The more saturated your fatty tissues are, the less MDA, malondialdehyde, there will be in your blood. And after that, so if you're really PUFA dominant and you do the test, MDA will be high, and it will probably be above range. So that will be, I guess, a good gauging mechanism. You eat saturated fat, you eat a lot of it, as much as you want for a few months. You test it, and if your MDA goes back, in range, then there's no reason to continue eating, being in this low carb diet, even though it's mostly saturated fat. I think at that point you should start shifting towards the carbs. Now, if you ask me, I would start, with the carbs from the very beginning. But if somebody, really likes the high-fat diet, that would be my explanation of why it would be beneficial.
Yeah, there are some questions in the chat, but we had we talked about this a lot on the last show, so I don't want to totally derail things. I'd rather chat with people on Skype. So was there any other? I have this simple heating of tumor.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
And this is interesting because it's actually listed as a potential cancer therapy on the website of the American Cancer Society. So it's listed as a viable cancer therapy on both cancer.gov and the cancer.org, the latter being like the American Cancer Society. I don't know why it's not being pursued. I mean, actually, if you look at the pages, they're really cryptic. They just say it was tried in the early 20th century, and then they don't say anything else afterwards. But it actually explains a couple of things which have been thought to be very peculiar to people being stricken with cancer. One of them is that these people tend to have random and pretty intense fevers. So it's out of nowhere they'll develop a fever into the 102, 103 degrees Fahrenheit, and then they'll start shaking, and nobody knows why. And one explanation that the doctors will give is that so-called tumor lysis syndrome. So basically, when the tumor cells break apart and start leaking things into the bloodstream, based on that, on these other studies, that the mitochondrial fragments act as stress triggers, right? The body interprets them as viruses. That may be one explanation why, but I don't think that explains it, because that does not result in fever. It results into activating the adrenal system. Yet people with cancer very often have these random bouts of fever, and doctors say it's unknown. No matter what it is, it's probably not therapeutic, or it's just a result of the person having the cancer. Well, if you look at these studies that show that actually raising the temperature of the entire body or of the tumor itself to about, I think, 98 or 99 degrees Fahrenheit, you can actually achieve a very rapid and often complete disappearance of the tumor in about 40% of the cases, and it does not come back. So maybe the very purpose of this fever is that the body is trying to raise the temperature in order to get rid of the tumor. And coincidentally, the immune system works better when your core temperature is higher. And we now know that the immune system is heavily involved in pretty much every cancer. And now this drug that they developed for treating melanoma, Opdivo, it's called Opdivo. It's basically an immune booster. Now they're trying to get it approved for basically all cancers, to get a blank approval. No matter what cancer you have, you get Opdivo plus whatever else is specific for that cancer. So long story short, if you can do water baths, or you can use light bulbs. In one of the studies that I have in the post, they used 300 watt incandescent bulbs, and that's basically instead of that, I think it would be better to use the infrared lights you can get in the States. Each bulb is 250 watts, so that will be enough to basically point it at the tumor, whatever it is. If it's close to the surface, even better. If it's on the surface, perfect, right? But because red light penetrates rather deeply, you should be able to heat up the tumor with these lights, even if it's like deep inside the body. And they were doing like basically like just a single heating. It's not a therapy you need to do for weeks or even for months. Just a single heating, as long as you reach that critical temperature, which in Celsius degrees was between 40 and 41 and a half, that was enough to trigger full remission and permanent in about 40% of the cases.
Yeah, I remember Ray mentioned hyperthermia treatment in his autism newsletter. And I remember going on like a dive and checking it out. And there was like a place in Sweden that was selling like tents, and they were heating people up. I forget what for specific diseases. But in Ray's newsletter, he says, results revealed fewer autistic-like behaviors for children with fever compared to controls, with more than 80% of fever subjects showing some behavioral improvements and approximately 30% exhibiting dramatic improvements. And so, again, this aligns with the whole idea that the temperature is important for like the functioning of the tissue. And again, this is, yet another thing that is often not plugged into the equation when anybody is talking about their specific view of what is or isn't healthy.
And it matches perfectly with the metabolic viewpoint, because what raises temperature? Thyroid, progesterone, protein, salt. So all of these things now, when you look at this from this angle, make perfect sense. In order for your tissues to be functioning well, they need the higher temperature, right? And then you can raise it externally because, if you have cancer, you're probably hypothyroid. So it's like basically the internal mechanism is not working, but you can achieve that through external mechanisms. But given that thyroid is actually an uncoupler, if you take a thyroid hormone, it actually has an uncoupling effect in higher doses. Now it makes perfect sense why thyroid will be therapeutic for cancer. It's not just the production of the energy, it's raising the temperature as well.
Yeah, I had a reference. I can't find it immediately, but like the process of mitochondrial respiration would increase the temperature. And so that's why it's so odd that like the people promoting cryotherapy and ice baths, and these are like the opposite direction of mitochondrial respiration. And so it doesn't really fit together that well.
I think they're doing it because they're saying like, well, because adrenaline will rise when you're very cold, it will turn your white fat into brown fat, okay. And that brown fat will burn more calories. Now that's true, but it's also shown that conclusively that brown fat is one of the first things that happens when you have a very aggressive tumor, is that it actually causes the conversion of white fat into the brown fat tissue, because the adrenaline is elevated in people with cancer. So it's like you almost kind of like, and that's actually, it was shown to be one of the contributing factors to cachexia, the conversion of the browning of the fat as a result of adrenaline, which is high in people with cancer, was shown to be one of the factors in the wasting syndrome. So, most people that were doing these cryo baths and like jumping into ice baths, they probably don't have cancer, but if some of them do, you can actually make it much more aggressive because of the sudden drop in temperature and the raise of adrenaline.
Good to know. Any other articles? The vitamin. I did want to talk about the vitamin K one, if you do.
Let's see.
The arterial stiffness.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll do that and then start take a call or two and go into super chats, and then take more calls if we have time.
Yeah. So basically, like with the vitamin K, I don't. People have asked Ray like, what can they do for like blood pressure? And I think in the past, like he was recommending 50 milligrams of vitamin K or something like that. And then he got a lot of heat while the Piterian.com website was still online. There was actually a special thread there that said this is complete BS. There is absolutely no evidence that vitamin K has any role in regulating blood pressure and whatnot, right? Well, it does. It's now known that in sufficient doses, it will lead to decalcification of the soft tissue. And it's the blood vessels, it's the calcification of the blood vessels under the effects of aldosterone and cortisol. That's what really leads. It's the main cause of high blood pressure. It's because when the heart has to pump harder, the blood vessels are no longer supple and they can't really expand. But vitamin K was shown in this study that it can actually reverse that process. And as a result of that, blood pressure drops as well. And there was I posted a study there that showed that 10 milligrams of vitamin K every other day for about 6 months reversed the arterial calcification in a patient with a severe one as a result of kidney disease.
Yeah, I have a few quotes from him saying like 10 to 40 or even 50 milligrams per day can be good. And he specifically mentioned when the Thorne product used to have that dropper, like taking a full dropper. And I found the Japanese trials of people using 90 milligrams to reverse osteoporosis like instantly. So I'm like, that's shocking that it was so controversial. I think that was a few years ago, but maybe we are talking about Ketarian was like 2013 or 14 or something.
Yeah, something like that. It was a while ago. There was this guy there who started a separate blog, which was called Is Pete Right?
Mm-hmm.
In which he basically he had like a few articles where he tried to challenge Pete and saying like, this is not true. There's no evidence. And vitamin K was one of the things he looked at.
I think it was Matthias, right? Is that?
Yes, I think it was Matthias.
I do like him a lot, though. Okay, yeah. Okay.
So other things that, I mean, in relation to vitamin K, because I do, like, just like I said, I search PubMed every once in a while for things that I'm really interested in. Vitamin K is one of them. If you check the latest studies on vitamin K, it's basically, I mean, I think I've mentioned it before, it's about to be approved as actually both prevention and treatment of liver cancer in the United States. And currently it's also in clinical trials for virtually every type of blood cancers, lymphomas, leukemias, myeloproliferative disorders like the polycythemia vera, which is a high red blood cell count, things like that. So there's a company out there that's testing vitamin K for all of these cancers as a monotherapy. So it's just vitamin K on its own. And speaking of osteoporosis, for a long time the Japanese thought that basically vitamin K only works by increasing the calcium uptake in the bones. But now they found out, recent studies have shown that somehow vitamin K is capable of negating the effect of cortisol. And cortisol is known to have a pro-osteoporosis, osteopenic effect on the bone. And somehow vitamin K is capable to fully block and reverse that effect depending on the dosage. And I think the dosage they used was 45 milligrams daily. But yeah, so there's more to vitamin K than meets the eye. And I think the thinking of it as a quinone helps a lot because, you know, from the point of view of of medicine, it's just a vitamin, and its sole known function, according to medicine, is to increase the carboxylation of osteocalcin. But it has other functions as well. It can serve as an alternative electron carrier if you have a deficiency in coenzyme Q10, which is what many people taking statins have, right? And in general, CoQ10 levels drop with age. So, you know, just the vitamin K being this alternative electron carrier, I think it has a beneficial effect. In addition to that, it is capable of oxidizing estradiol back to estrone, which is only about 1/10 as potent of an estrogen as estradiol. So it's shifting the balance of estrogen, more towards weaker estrogens. And on top of that, it's also an aromatase inhibitor. So it's got a number of these different properties that all of them together are, probably responsible for its anabolic effects on the bones. And the fact that it's a cortisol and an estrogen antagonist should be giving the gynecologist a pause, because they keep maintaining that estrogen is anabolic for the bones, yet every chemical known to oppose estrogen so far has been shown to be anabolic for the bone as well. So you can't have it both ways. One or the other has to be wrong.
And that matrix GLA protein seems to be pretty central to a lot of problems. And then the vitamin K, along with carbon dioxide, is responsible for the healthy carboxylated form. Is that right?
Yes. So the ratio of carboxylated to under carboxylated osteocalcin is what determines, is the main. It's almost like the NAD to the NADH ratio, but for the bones. That's what determines how much bone you'll be how much bone cells you will create versus how many will be destroyed.
That would be really useful to get from your general GP, I feel like, but I that's probably not.
You can get it. There's a test. If you go to I think Dan Witch put it on his website. I posted about this a few years ago. I haven't looked at it since then, but you can get a test for vitamin K. And then used to be they only measure the levels of vitamin K in the blood, but then they realized that's not sufficient. And now I think the full test, if you're willing to pay for it or insurance covers it, actually includes both the levels of vitamin K and then that ratio of like carboxylated to under carboxylated osteocalcin.
Nice. Okay, so we're hour 10. Have quite a bit of super chats, so we should probably move on, unless there's anything you wanted to quickly note.
I think we're fine. I mean, we should probably start on the super chats.
Okay, let me idealabsdc.com, Georgi Dinkov's boutique supplement company. Check that out. You can follow Georgi at twitter.com/hateit, and he posts a lot of great stuff on there. I do coaching at dannyroddy.com/resources, and I tried to make this page useful and not just an advertisement, so you can download my book that I wrote in 2013 and a video series I made in 2014, this pyramid thing, and testing your thyroid function. So these are some of the most common questions I get often, and not sure what's up with that, but... And then you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/DannyRoddy. And then I have Instagram at the Danny Roddy weblog. And unfortunately, guys, I don't answer messages on there. I get like so many messages, and if people sent me email, I would answer those. I have to limit the amount of places that I'm answering messages because I'll go crazy.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do as well.
So yeah, don't message me on there because I won't see it. Okay. Let me put up the number. I haven't tried this in a long time, so hopefully this works out. But the number is 1-530-359-8342, and I'll just take the first caller. And so I have no idea who that will be. And Georgi, why don't you talk about not the experiment that we already talked about, but the DHT prostate one?
Oh yeah, I should have sent you basically the lab that does the study sends me weekly updates, and right now we're testing basically the experimental compounds are DHT, Cortinone Plus, which it's the same formulation as the one for the study with leukemia, and also a type of selenium. So apparently selenium also has highly, unlike, I don't know if you remember, there were these the human studies with vitamin E and selenium that were done back in like 2010, 2011, and the public got spooked because the results were like, oh, don't take because this is going to increase your chance of prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. Well, based on the results so far, it looks very much like it may cure it. But so far, so the actual treatment has been going on for 2 weeks, and the tumor has flatlined. So we'll see. Hopefully in another 2 weeks, I'm hoping that we're going to have some complete disappearances. While the curve for the group it's not taking anything, it's like a straight line at about 45-degree angle. Mm-hmm. And then for all the experimental groups, it kind of rose almost together with the curve for the first few days, and then gradually flatline. And it looks like it's actually starting to fall. Mm-hmm. So there's some decrease actually in tumor volume, which is very, very exciting. So we'll see.
And then we talked about it a few shows ago, but then the ideas for future projects, one of them was related to the essential fatty acid idea, right?
Yeah. So after this study is done, I will do, hopefully if it turns out as I expect, I'll publish that, but I know that there will be some attacks against it because...
So we have our first call. Let me figure out, I think I can merge it here. Hello, you are on the air with Danny and Georgi. Hello? Hey, you're on the air. What's up? And they're gone.
It says on my screen that he left.
But the sound got significantly worse during that time.
Actually, my entire screen went dark when you picked up, or I don't know what happened, but as soon as I heard his voice, everything went dark.
Interesting. Okay, we'll try to do that one more time, but if it doesn't work, we'll just move on to super chats. So continue.
So yeah, I know. So if the study turns out as I expect, and basically DHEA turns out to be therapeutic for prostate,
is there somebody on the line right now? Very professional.
I don't hear anybody.
It says a number and then Georgi.
Well, that person should speak then. I mean, if somebody's on the air.
Yeah, I don't know what to. Okay, forget it. Maybe they hung up and that it's still showing it.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I know that pharma companies will come back, well, not pharma companies, but mainstream medicine will come back and say, well, we know that DHT gets metabolized into estrogenic metabolites, and those activate the estrogen receptor, and that's probably the beneficial effect. They've already kind of made that claim through other studies. Basically, there's a study on using DHT for depression and anxiety. And then that study says, well, DHT gets metabolized into something called 3-alpha androstenediol. And that thing is capable of activating estrogen receptor beta. So we're thinking it's the estrogenic effects of DHT metabolites that are really responsible for the benefits, right? So I'm going to say, okay, so we're going to do a follow-up, and then we're still going to have DHT, but then we're also going to have a DHT steroid, which is slightly modified, and it's incapable of getting metabolized into estrogenic metabolites. That steroid is drostanolone. We actually mentioned a few times on some of your previous podcasts that it also has evidence of potentially treating prostate cancer. So if that works as well, then it leaves no other explanation except that androgens are actually beneficial for prostate cancer. Now, if that works, and if I have the money, I may do yet a third prostate cancer study, because these cancer cell lines that are being used right now, they're all human cancers. They're being transplanted onto mice, but they're human cancers. So it's really cool because it's hard to argue. Unlike the hamster study that with cortisone and leukemia, that leukemia is an actual mouse leukemia. It's not really something that can develop in humans. But these are human tumors. So if the first and the second study work, then the third study I will do will basically be, so I will actually, let me see. So I wanted to do a study that basically will block cortisol as well. And that should, actually show that cortisol is also involved, but also I will use a cell line that is insensitive to androgens. So basically the current version of the current view of that cancer line says that, well, it doesn't matter if you castrate, it doesn't matter if you give androgens or not. This cancer is basically should not respond at all because it's already mutated and it's not really a hormonal cancer anymore. That's the castration resistant prostate cancer that now they don't know how to treat, except that study with testosterone. And I looked at basically the cells of the patients that they took as a biopsy, and they look identical to a cell line which is used in mouse studies. It's still human. It's called PC-3. So it's a prostate cancer line which is taken from a patient who died from it, and it's castration-resistant prostate cancer. And if the androgens work on that line as well, then the two main theories of prostate cancer are essentially collapsing. Number one, that androgens are bad, right, and that the estrogen is good. So that will be gone after the two studies are done. And the second one would be basically that the prostate cancer can become castration resistant, right? In other words, it will not respond to hormones anymore. So if we prove that that's wrong, then
Okay, let's try this one more time. Okay.
Somebody calling?
Yeah. Hello, you're on the air, person? I don't know what's up with this.
I don't hear anything. Actually, this time didn't even show my screen that somebody's calling.
I tried to merge the call like I always do, and it didn't work. People calling in, if there's some thing we're not anticipating, please mention it in the chat. But I'm just merging the calls like I have done before. Okay, finish that thought, and then we'll move on to super chats, and then before we close out, we'll try taking calls one more time.
Yeah, and jumping from that on to the triple negative breast cancer, I will plan on doing a study with progesterone and proving that cancer is still very much driven by estrogen and that progesterone is therapeutic. And if that works, I mean, these are two big ideas, two cancers that are really I think most cancers at this point in males are prostate, right? If you look just at the rates, I think the predominant cancer in females is breast cancer, just based on absolute numbers, and then the predominant cancer in males is prostate cancer. So if you show that the theories, at least the main tenets underlying the treatments of these cancers are pretty much 100 degrees opposite of what's being thrown out there, I think that will generate sufficient controversy for people to start questioning on a mass scale, what exactly is being done to them. I don't think it will be a nice realization that getting castrated is not a treatment for your cancer. It's actually killing you. But I think that's what it will take for people to take matters into their own hands and sue the pharma companies out of existence.
And you'll be achieving your life mission of rocking the boat.
Story of my life. Wrong guy at the wrong place at the wrong time.
It's all I heard this talked about with politics, but if you are not a dissident, if you are not a fringe view, it's almost like you're doing something wrong, So, yeah, I don't.
Or you're not doing anything, right? You're just basically like going with the flow.
Okay, we'll try this call one more time, and then if it doesn't work, we're going to move on. Am I pressing the right button? Maria, merge call. It doesn't. I don't know what's up. This might be Boomer Tech. But I don't understand what's going on because Georgie and I just have a normal Skype call, and this is exactly how I normally did it.
And the first time the person called, it actually showed me on the screen that somebody's joined.
Sorry guys, I don't understand what's up. I desperately want to take calls. I love doing it. Okay, we'll get on to super chats. LAZ, thank you so much, Ellie. You're the man. For $2, he says, how to increase carbon dioxide tolerance.
What do you mean by tolerance? Like basically, like, are you getting panicky with carbon dioxide? Because that's
normal.
That's the only thing that I can. Normal. I mean, like the only thing that I know that this actually can be causing problems. Like when your CO2 levels are low, initially when you raise it by breathing into a bag, you might start feeling like this like wave of anxiety setting in, right? It's like you're about to choke. But it's if you can hold on for just a few more seconds, it tends to dissipate pretty quickly. I don't know, what else could they mean by tolerance? If it's doing the Buteyko method. Again, or like even holding your breath, like usually that initial feeling that you're about to suffocate, if you can power through that, it only lasts for about maybe 10 seconds. And after that, actually, like the fact that you're getting improved metabolism and buildup of carbon dioxide tends to make these, feelings of anxiety disappear.
We keep getting calls, but I don't think it's going to work. Okay, Drew F. And I experimented a little with dried ice. Like I keep getting shipments from a food company, and they'll put a big block of dried ice, and I'll try to devise a way to put my face in it and huff the dry ice. But yeah, it does become uncomfortable to a certain point when you're doing it. So, so exactly what you noticed.
I prefer pharmacological methods. In my experience, methylene blue and vitamin B1 work wonders. Both of them raise carbon dioxide just by virtue of stimulating the metabolism, and also thiamine is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, so it works similarly to acetazolamide in pretty similar doses. So if typical dosage of acetazolamide is 250 milligram per pill, and people usually take like one pill a few times a day, in my experience, taking just one tablet of thiamine, like 200 to 300 milligrams, with just a few drops of methylene blue, like 2 or 3 milligrams. This has such a tremendous CO2 boosting effect that I get drowsy, which is actually one of the first signs that your CO2 has increased. Drowsiness and like this sense of calm, and your breathing basically you should be able to breathe almost imperceptibly without feeling like you're fighting for air. Instead of like panting and still feeling like you're not getting sufficient air. So when I use when I use methylene blue and thiamine, I can actually hold my breath for 2 minutes without feeling the need to breathe. I almost have to like make myself breathe because I feel like it's maybe it's a good idea and I don't want to pass out.
Good stuff. Okay, our buddy Drew F for $10. He said, asked Georgie about stressor on Twitter. Stressnon on Twitter. For me, no results with eugenol version. Can he elaborate on the new version coming out next week? Will it be dissolved in SFA esters again? Still confused. Thank you.
Yeah, the batch that we have right now, we only had a batch with eugenol and ethanol, only one, and then we re-added the SFA esters because basically the eugenol was causing irritation to people's skin when it's beyond a certain concentration in the product. So we re-added the SFA esters. So even now, if you get the Stressnone, you will have SFA esters, you'll have ethanol, and a little bit of eugenol. So at the very least, it should be back to the way it was working originally. There's still eugenol. We're working on trying to get that replaced altogether with something else. But the SFA esters and ethanol are here to stay.
Sweet. Thanks, Drew, and thanks, Ellie, earlier. Oren Frazier for $5. Thank you so much, Oren. He says, hello, Georgie. Will taking Progesterone or Tyromax lower the endogenous production of the long/medium term of hormones you are trying to increase?
Well, Tyromax, if you take Tyromax in sufficient dosage, it will suppress endogenous production of thyroid hormone. But as the studies that Broder Barnes conducted showed, the suppression, noticeable suppression of endogenous thyroid release only happens if you raise your temperatures above 99 degrees and you maintain this for 24 to 48 hours. So that usually does not happen. I mean, sustained temperatures of 99 degrees or more, in my experience, doesn't really happen unless the person is taking like 3-4 grains a day. And most of the clients that buy from us, they don't take such high doses. As far as Progesterone, neither pregnenolone nor progesterone nor DHEA are known to suppress their own synthesis. In fact, they're known to stimulate it, with the possible exception of DHEA, because if you abuse it, it will convert to estrogen, and estrogen is known to be suppressive. But DHEA by itself is not. So if you're using the Progesterone in such dosage that you take no more than 15 milligrams of DHEA per day, there shouldn't be any suppression. And several people have posted blood work before and after taking Progesterone. They've posted on the forum under the Progesterone thread. So if you scroll through it, it'll take some time to find them, but not a single one of these people basically demonstrated suppression or change in LH/FSH or any of the other hormones that they actually checked.
Just a comment on taking thyroid and it lowering your own production. That's part of the therapy. like that, lowering your own production of TSH is, I think, from what I understand, and just decreasing the activity of the pituitary, like in general, is part of why thyroid is good. And so I think that is maybe something people say to scare other people, like, oh, you don't want to take thyroid because it will lower your own production. And I think that's like based on like a misunderstanding that the whole point is that you're decreasing your own production of those inflammatory pituitary hormones and thus making you feel better, you know?
So actually, let me clarify. If you take in thyroid hormone, let's say 1 or 2 grains, TSH will drop, but your endogenous production of thyroid hormone of the actual gland will not. I mean, it will drop, but not in a significant manner, unless you're raising your temperatures to 99 degrees or more and maintaining that, in which case you're starting to suppress your thyroid gland as well. But the initial suppression is only of the pituitary hormone, TSH, and that I think that happens at any thyroid dosage. Even half a grain will have an effect, and that is highly beneficial. That's not something to be feared. Anything that suppresses pituitary hormones tends to be beneficial.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Oren. Jaeger ODA for $1.99. Thank you so much, Jaeger. He says, any hope for an Idea Labs Halodrol supplement? You know what?
Well, it's a steroid, but I stay away. I think it's like a chlorine-containing steroid. The problem with these is that the laws in the United States have been changed in such a way that now they're actually looking at structure of the steroid. And the decision has been left largely up to the DEA. And I know there have been several lawsuits in the last year where people got busted for selling modifications of DHEA, which look like it's like just a DHEA steroid, but the DEA for some reason did not like that steroid, and these people got busted. So it's no longer sufficient to be selling steroid that isn't banned. I mean, even if it's not banned, if it runs afoul of that structural similarity that is left up to the DEA to define, the Drug Enforcement Agency, it's not even the FDA anymore. It's actually the DEA. You can get into serious trouble. So, I'm working on some other steroid products, custom steroids that are basically targeting the glucocorticoid receptor almost exclusively. Progesterone is, cortisone is one such product, but I'm trying to develop something that is uniquely targeting the cortisol receptor and not much else. But as far as releasing steroids that are considered androgenic anabolic steroids, even though that may not be the case, I want to stay away from that because it's not worth risking the entire company over a steroid that can get you busted, even though it's probably relatively benign.
I just realized I didn't pick a winner for the the Idea Labs giveaway. So I don't know how I'm
Okay.
going to do that on the fly.
Well, email me
Okay.
later.
Okay, we'll pick 2 people next week. Yeah, because it will. I don't want to take showtime away from that. Okay. Thank you. Who was? Oh, Jaeger. Thank you so much, Jaeger. Gregory for $9.99. Thank you so much, Gregory. Sincerely appreciate it.
Hold on. Let me
Okay,
turn
take
on the
your time.
lights.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. Sincerely appreciate it. Spending your Friday evening with us. You know that it's amazing. I sincerely appreciate it. We have a great viewership, and so I'm extremely fortunate. So thank you guys. Please like this episode if you get a chance. That really helps us out, you know, and it's motivation that people actually enjoy the episodes, and it's nice. And then subscribe if you haven't already. It's like shocking how many people will win the Idea Labs thing and then not be subscribed to the channel. So I'll just move on to another person. And yeah, there's such a limited amount of people that comment. You're likely to win a lot of the time. And so it's just it's like easy free Tokovit. And so take advantage of Georgie's generosity, because a lot of times I'll pick the people that have already not that I'll pick them, but I'll do the comment generator, and it will pick people that have already won like a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, I've noticed. I mean, they're repeated winners. So
and yeah, so like the episode, subscribe, and then just leave a comment with whatever you want, and then you'll be entered. Okay, so let's get back to these questions. Okay, Gregory for $9.99. He says, I have a friend taking gabapentin, Rexulti, Pristiq, Lunesta, Trilapetol for depression/anxiety. How bad are these, and could you recommend a less invasive way of treating this condition?
I don't know why Lunesta is being taken, but this is a sleep drug. So the gabapentin is not that bad. I mean, it's a GABA agonist, and they use it for treating seizures as well. As far as treating depression, I mean, there are multiple ways to do it. Probably one of the most benign is that a study in the 60s showed that combining thiamine, vitamin B1, with acetazolamide cured about 70% of the psychiatric conditions that they were looking at. So it was highly non-specific, very effective treatment across the board for things, mania, even dementia. And the dosage wasn't that high. I think there were like 500 milligrams of vitamin B1 and I think 500 milligrams of acetazolamide. But if you don't want to use the acetazolamide, thiamine plus methylene blue would probably have a similar effect. And methylene blue itself was shown to be a highly effective antidepressant in humans at a dosage of just 50 milligrams daily for just 2 weeks. And the study itself concluded this is a highly effective and safe antidepressant. It's a shame that it's not in more general use. So that will be my choice. In terms of the pharma drugs, if that person wants to stay on drugs for depression, I would try to convince the doctor to switch to something safer, or at least like not as dangerous as the other ones. And the drug mianserin is a known. It's mostly a serotonin antagonist. It does have some agonist properties on the 5-HT1 receptor, but other than that, is an antagonist on the rest of them. I think it's a safer choice. It's basically like you'll be blocking your serotonin, and the only known side effect from it is that in very high dosages, it has a prolonging effect on the QT interval, which is basically like it causes a type of heart arrhythmia, but you have to take massive doses for that to manifest itself. And it's approved in the United States and pretty much everywhere in the world. So if the doctor wants to keep you on a pharma antidepressant, you can at least ask for that.
Yeah, and like trying to correct things in the order of correctability. So if you get like labs and you have a low vitamin D, like try that. And like if your thyroid function is low, like try correcting the thyroid. If your nutrition is all over the place, like try constructing some satisfying nutrition that is easy to maintain long term. And then all the things you mentioned, I think, are equally good. But it's just like, yeah, but that seems like a sticky situation of a person with they're saying they were on multiple drugs, so that seems.
Yeah, the Lunesta is really concerning because it's just like that drug Ambien. I mean, it's a sleep drug, and is now known that there are several class action lawsuits against it right now ongoing. You basically you start sleepwalking, and you don't just walk. You get into your car and you drive around town, and then basically like somebody startles you out of your dream in the middle of the highway, and you crash your car. I mean, quite a few people died because of taking that drug and doing strange things in their sleep. And of course, when they wake up, they don't remember it. So I would not take Lunesta and or Ambien. These are dangerous drugs. The gabapentin is fine, but again, there are even safer options than that.
Good stuff. Thank you, Gregory. Oren, for another $2. Thank you, Oren. He says, thoughts on resveratrol, pterostilbene, and NMN. We've talked about this many times, but do you want to give the rundown?
I will just as a quick guideline, go to Google and type stilbene space estrogen, and you will see that invariably every single chemical of the stilbene class is a potent phytoestrogen. The infamous drugs Vioxx that killed quite a few people is actually itself a stilbene derivative, and as such is highly estrogenic as well. So is resveratrol. So all of these drugs, the stilbenes, of which resveratrol is a prime example, are phytoestrogens, and they have about the same affinity for the estrogen receptor as estradiol, and some of them are even higher. So you're getting pumped full of highly estrogenic chemicals, and I don't know of a single good thing about resveratrol. It activates the sirtuin genes, and those are now known to be upregulated in cancer because they're responsible for controlling the rate of oxidation of fat. Niacinamide blocks deactivates these genes, and as such promotes the oxidation of sugar. Again, resveratrol is a phytoestrogen. You'll get almost every effect that estrogen has. Many people promote it as a SERM, selective estrogen receptor modulator, because when you take resveratrol, your estrogen levels tend to drop. But that's what happens when you take an estrogenic chemical. Because of the negative feedback effect, your body will produce less of your own estrogen because you're already full. You're pumping yourself full of these other phytoestrogens like resveratrol. So I don't know of a single good reason to take resveratrol or any of the other stilbenes. And I think most of that research is coming out of the lab of Dr. David Sinclair, the guy from Harvard, who not many people know, but his company, Certris, which was created to promote a synthetic version of resveratrol, that company was acquired by GlaxoSmithKline in 2007, and then GlaxoSmithKline paid Mr. Sinclair $700 million, and then took that patent, basically bought the rights for that patented resveratrol from him, and got it started several clinical trials. And in 3 of these trials, there were increased number of deaths in the active group, and as a result, GlaxoSmithKline, stopped those trials and eventually ran that Certris company into the ground. So even the large pharmaceutical company decided that resveratrol is a no-go. So that should tell you enough. Big money says no to resveratrol, and they tried it. Believe me, it's not like they didn't want to try it and they didn't want to turn it into a drug. They did everything they could, but it started killing people, and they decided the legal risk wasn't worth it.
And then Ray has an old, if you can track it down, like don't fall for the resveratrol scam or something.
Scam, exactly. Yeah.
And then that Sinclair guy is like on a media tour. He hits so many huge podcasts, and it's like people think he's like such a genius, and like I don't know, man. Whatever. Okay.
I mean, his if you look at his pitch around the 2005 2007, he was all about the sirtuins, right? And then after his company got bought, they tried this idea with the synthetic resveratrol, and it turned out it's killing people. Now he doesn't talk about the sirtuins anymore. Now he's talking about the NAD to the NADH ratio, which is a valid concept, but basically the way he's proposing this to be elevated is by selling these stilbene molecules and a little bit of nicotinamide riboside. Now that latter one is fine. That's actually, it will have the similar effects to niacinamide. But I will still prefer niacinamide, because niacinamide, of all the precursors to NAD that are out there, like nicotinamide mononucleotide, nicotinamide riboside, niacin, and niacinamide, only niacinamide is known as a sirtuin inhibitor. And that has a very potent is not only has an effect on decreasing the oxidation of fat and promoting the oxidation of sugar. But a study that I posted about 2 years ago demonstrated that inhibiting the sirtuins basically blocks the effects of estrogen at the cellular level and increases the expression of the androgen receptor and the sensitivity of the cell to androgens such as dihydrotestosterone. And only niacinamide has those effects. All the other precursors are basically just precursors to NAD, but they don't really have these additional benefits that niacinamide does.
Yeah. Cortinon is on your, somebody's asking in the chat where they can purchase Cortinon. It's on your ideallabsdc.com.
/lab. It's on the under lab. Okay. Yeah, it's on the lab section.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks for that, Oren. Sincerely appreciate it. Sandy, who is an amazing individual, for $5. Thank you, Sandy. She says, was taking 120 milligrams of progesterone plus around 7 milligrams of DHEA every day, but it was extending my periods or even starting them, so I had to stop. FYI, I'm 53. That seems like too much DHEA, right?
Potentially too much DHEA, but I think also Ray said that you should only be taking the high dosage of progesterone for a few days until the estrogen is basically getting like flushed out of the cell, and the estrogen receptor is breaking the bond between the estrogen receptor and estrogen. And after that, I think he said maintenance dose for progesterone should be like 30 to 50 milligrams daily, something like that. I seem to remember he was saying that high dosage of progesterone are only for a few days to normalize the state, and then the maintenance dose should be lower. So I would try, like, if the 7 milligrams of DHEA, actually I wouldn't take it like a full 7 milligram dose of DHEA as single dosage. I think that in certain people that's enough to trigger the elevation of estrone and subsequently estradiol as well. I will do no more than 5 milligrams per dose. So if that dose can be split into two, it will probably be much better. And the progesterone dosage as well. So 120. So if you can do the 60 milligrams progesterone and 3 milligrams DHEA twice a day, I think the results will be different than taking this as a single dose.
And Sadie says she was taking, I presume she means the DHEA for fibroids?
I think the progesterone is much more likely to be helpful for fibroids. Older studies called progesterone the most potent anti-fibratogenic chemical known that the body produces itself.
You know what? Before I forget, somebody paid for a super chat that we weren't able to get to, but this one's from Charlotte. She says, my 22-year-old niece has been suffering from seizures since she was 16. Coincidentally, when she first went on the pill, her seizures have been controlled by medication ever since, which doesn't make... you know what? I didn't see more with... That's all I have. It was like a Facebook thing. I didn't capture the whole thing. I apologize, Charlotte, but seizures for a 22-year-old.
About 2 years ago, there was a study that generated a lot of controversy in mainstream medical circles, and controversy really is a euphemism for, oops, they got us. they found out we're lying. So they found out by accident, they claim, that aromatase inhibitors stop seizures in their tracks. And now I actually have corresponded with the author of that study, and he thinks that basically most of the seizure drugs that are currently on the market, with the possible exception of gabapentin, all of the other seizure drugs should be banned, and basically the neurology profession should move almost entirely towards drugs that block either the effects of estrogen or inhibits its synthesis. So it's not a coincidence that progesterone has a very powerful anti-seizure effect. It's a GABA agonist, and it's an estrogen antagonist as well. But other things that block the effects of estrogen or decrease in synthesis should be able to help as well. So if she wants to stick to the dietary methods, things like aspirin, vitamin E, magnesium, vitamin K, vitamin A, vitamin D, all of these have anti-estrogenic effects, and all of them have shown also anti-seizure effects as well. Progesterone, of course, would be my choice because it's probably the most potent out of all of these. But if the doctor doesn't want to put her on and actually she's on the pill. I heard that the young woman is on the pill, but the pill probably contains a combination of an estrogen and a synthetic progestin. So she goes to the doctor and asks for progesterone. it's likely the response you'll get back is like, you already, I'm already giving you progesterone, because that progestin in your pill is just like progesterone but better, right? That's not true. Only progesterone is known to have the anti-seizure effects, and all of these synthetic progestogens that are in the pills are actually now known to have estrogenic effects, and they don't have the anti-seizure, the calming effect of bioidentical progesterone that has on the brain. And if aromatase inhibitors are an option as well, and if the seizures are really severe and hard to control with progesterone alone, I would ask the doctor for a pharmacological aromatase inhibitor, such as I think one of the safest is known as exemestane. If you just mention that to the doctor, they'll know. And that, in combination with progesterone, should be able to stop the seizures for good.
Georgi, how is your bladder doing?
It's fine.
Will you talk to the audience? I'm going to go take a whiz real fast.
I'm sweating a lot. Remember, like that criteria for peeing versus evaporating the water. Yeah. Like basically, if your metabolism is good, you shouldn't be peeing too often.
Not a good day.
I'm joking. Maybe you're nervous. Such a relief, huh?
I feel a lot better. Thank you. Okay. Okay. What did we got through? Sandy's question. Huge Ray Pete fan for $10. He says, "What would you do if your son had OCD, ADD, or Asperger's?"
Well, Asperger's is part of the autism spectrum, and this is now conclusively known outside of the medical circles, but in the research circles, now autism is conclusively known to be linked to high serotonin during the gestation and afterwards, and also exposure to elevated estrogen during pregnancy. So I would try actually anti-serotonin interventions depending on how severe the condition is. And those actually tend to resolve things like AD/ADHD, which in my opinion are imaginary. They're there as pathology, but it really is just a manifestation of low dopamine/high serotonin, which matches perfectly well with the autism/Asperger's as well, which is now known to be caused by serotonin. And since serotonin and dopamine are inversely correlated, chances are if your serotonin is high, you will have, in addition to the Asperger's/autism, also some kind of like a attention deficit disorder. You also have to be a little bit careful, because many times psychiatrists throw these additional diagnoses simply to prescribe drugs. And I've heard several of people that I know that are psychiatrists, they're not really close friends, but I've gotten into discussions with them, and sometimes they say that sometimes they will purposefully tack on that diagnosis if they think that the patient is unruly, or if they think that basically the child is getting ideas of unruliness from his or her parents. So it's almost like a punishment. They'll diagnose you as AD/ADHD if you're suffering from oppositional defiant disorder, and they don't want to call it that. There is actually a diagnosis like that, but it takes a little bit more than just being an unruly child to get diagnosed with one. So if they don't have sufficient evidence to give you that diagnosis, they will sometimes give you AD/ADHD in retaliation for not following their orders, or for the child not behaving, as they think the child should, and listening to their orders. So it could very well be a fake diagnosis. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will, if you have autism, you'll have one of these as well. The diagnosis could very well be an artifact of the doctor's training, because they're trained that these things go together. So look for symptoms, and if they're not there, sometimes they may trigger them in the child by purposefully annoying the child in the office and making the child nervous, and and running around the office and causing trouble, and that will be enough to diagnose them with some additional disorder.
While I was gone, if you didn't say anything, Georgi can't actually see the chat, so I assume you don't have it open on your computer. So that might be something to think about. People were like, "Oh, he's not talking to us," and so that's why.
All I'm seeing is an empty chair and a laptop on the other side.
Just my empty video.
I'm not at that level to talk to myself yet, but maybe one day.
Okay, thank you so much. Huge repeat fan, appreciate it. Christina Tomaj for $9.99 with no message. Thank you so much, Christina, appreciate it. Oren Frazier for $5. Oren, you're like going to get my future kids through college. I appreciate it. He says, hair changed texture and started thinning after shaving the head at 19. Thoughts or any advice on hair, just metabolism, low estrogen and high androgen?
Actually, I think most of the hair loss is driven by adrenal overactivity. Conversely, gonadal hypoactivity. So if you haven't done any hormonal tests, I'll actually do tests for cortisol, prolactin, DHEA-S, or just DHEA would be enough. Total testosterone and dihydrotestosterone and vitamin D. Chances are that basically like cortisol and potentially DHEA would be high, and testosterone / DHT will probably be towards the lower end of normal, or potentially even below normal. So basically hair loss is just the first manifestation of chronic stress. And just like as I said before at the beginning of the show, when you're under stress and when you're moving towards fat metabolism, the organism starts shutting down things that are considered non-critical. And hair is a luxury in nature. It's not. It's something you can do without, even though it does have its uses in terms of protecting you from excessive heat and excessive cold. But hair, together with sexual function and creativity, are often the first three things to go when metabolism takes a dive. I will do those tests and see what happens, what results they bring back, and some of the interventions that have been reported consistently over the years to produce results by our clients are either topically, spraying a solution of caffeine and aspirin and niacinamide, or rubbing a solution of progesterone, either on its own or together with DHEA, rubbing some of it on your scalp. I think Ray even has a newsletter where he talks about caffeine, progesterone, and DHEA being and T3 being hair growth promoting nutrients.
Okay, two papers that I just wanted to talk about, but this Pitts et al. Paper in 1987, but they talk about how the high DHEA. Sorry, something's going on in the chat here. The high DHEA was a marker for the progressive male pattern baldness, and so I just put the Mia in timeout. Sorry, there's a spam person. Anyways, okay. I thought this was interesting because I think the researchers were looking at DHEA as a problem, but of course, as we've talked about many times, the DHEA tends to go up with cortisol, and then at some point they become dysregulated, and the DHEA, because it depends on your thyroid function, tends to decrease, and the cortisol stays high. And so this to me was very interesting because I had written that book kind of throwing out, floating these the bioenergetic view without ever even seeing a paper like this. And so the fact that this study adds evidence to the possibility that hyperadrenalism may be an important element in the complex biochemistry of male pattern baldness, I thought was extremely interesting. And then one of my other favorite articles that I spam often is by Courteau, I think, and it's Aging and Hair Cycles. And it said, in general, aging was reflected by a decline in the activity of hair follicles. Aging did not appear to follow a perfectly regular course over time. Periods of stability or even partial remission alternated with periods of more marked evolution. Individual factors such as a subject's general health and lifestyle may well play an important role in this evolution. The attempt to combat aging of scalp hair and the search for anti-hair loss or regrowth treatments are thus challenges with a great deal in common. And so again, that if that doesn't support the bioenergetic view, I don't know what does, so.
Well, and I'll throw another bump in there because, like as I mentioned, certain chemicals and nutrients I tracked their development on PubMed, and I was searching for DHT like a few days ago, and one of the latest studies shows that DHT actually promotes hair growth instead of inhibiting it, and it only starts to have an inhibitory effect in concentrations that are so high that are almost impossible to achieve like within the organism. So that study concludes with saying that physiological or even supraphysiological, in other words, above range levels of DHEA are highly unlikely to be the cause of the male pattern baldness because in that study, they actually promoted hair growth. So there's something else going on. And if DHEA, just like, not DHEA, DHT, if DHT is somehow implicated, just like DHEA, it's very likely to be an innocent bystander and to be there to try to correct things versus causing the pathology to
was
start
that a
with.
2020 paper that you're talking about? Okay,
Yeah.
I think Nicholas Simpson forwarded me that, and that's a good analysis. That's what I suspected while reading it, but I wasn't sure of the physiological versus supraphysiological amounts, and so that is.
So when they do supraphysiological, they usually mean like up to 2 times the upper normal range. So if the upper normal range is like, let's say like, I don't know, 95, then like up to 200 will probably be considered supraphysiological, and anything above that, then the doctor will start worrying that you have like a tumor somewhere, like a steroid producing tumor somewhere, right? But even getting to the point of like, if your levels are above the normal range, your doctor will already be freaking out, and it's very hard to get to that level endogenously. The studies that actually took biopsies from the scalp and measured levels of DHT, they never found them to be supraphysiological. At best, they found them to be like in the upper 25th percentile. But again, nobody has established this as a causative factor. All of this said is that in people with baldness, they may be like, and not all studies found that actually, in people with baldness, they may be like elevated levels of DHT, but still within range. But nobody ever proved that DHT itself causes the loss of hair and the death of the hair follicles. Yes. And this study says the exact opposite. We actually, because I think that they actually preface it with saying like, it's known that the androgens actually promote the growth of hair, which is what Ray has always been saying, that testosterone is known, people with high testosterone are known to have, thick hair on their head, like a, well-developed scalp. So it never made any sense, just as the, and now if you remember that there's a very good connection between baldness and prostate cancer, now that we know that prostate cancer is driven by estrogen, prolactin, and cortisol, that should tell you that these things probably have a role in the baldness. And knowing that DHT is potentially therapeutic in prostate cancer, that should further undermine the theory that androgens are the cause.
Yeah, I won't post all of them, but I can think of at least 2 papers that they took the atrophied hair follicles out of the human, and one they put them on a rat, I think, and they grew fine. And then the other one, I think they just I forgot how it was done, but they just gave it a new blood medium, and they didn't grow like spectacularly, but they grew better than on the actual person. And so again, it was more of the environment, not promoting the hair growth. Yeah. Okay.
I found it. Here's the link, so you can post it on the chat if you want.
Is this a Randall paper?
That's the one that was looking at. It's from January 2020.
Okay.
On DHT and hair growth. So
I will tweet it out. I should have retweeted Nick, but I forgot. Okay.
Yeah, so basically they found it in concentrations at about, let's see, about 1 micromole, right? That's pretty high. Like if you have 1 micromole, basically in order to achieve concentrations of 1 micromole per liter in your body of DHT, that means you have to be taken exogenously between 50 to 100 milligrams daily, right? and your daily production of DHT is only about 1 to 2 milligrams, because it's only a fraction. The main pathway to DHT is through testosterone, and since testosterone synthesis is only between 5 and 8 milligrams daily in a healthy, very healthy, muscular young male, this means that you're only going to be getting about 1 to 2 milligrams dihydrotestosterone daily. So it's next to impossible to get to the level of 50 to 100 milligrams daily production endogenously, which is the concentration that was shown to inhibit hair growth. Anything below that was highly stimulating for hair growth.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for the super chats. I hope we can get through all these. Sincerely appreciate it. Michael for 20 pesos. Thank you so much, Michael. He says, what about boron?
I don't like boron because multiple studies have confirmed that boron is estrogenic. Some studies in the early 90s show that boron raises androgen levels as well, specifically DHT. But those studies also showed that it has an estrogen promoting effect as well. Boron is carcinogenic. If you look at studies with boron in mice, it invariably causes breast cancer, depending on the dosage. And that's what that's one of the things that gives me a pause about boron. The contrarian view that I always get is yes, but they use very high doses, right? Yeah, that's true, but it shows you that boron is in the same class of chemicals like the heavy metals, and it's known to be estrogenic. And I don't think really we have a physiological need of boron. I think plants, boron is much more important from plants, but not so much for us. So I stay away from it. I don't think there's any benefit, and you can probably achieve the things that boron does, whatever that is, by taking a little bit of DHEA, which is a very reliable precursor to DHT in your body. And even testosterone will be safer than taking boron. I don't like boron, and I don't see. I haven't seen a good argument made for using it.
Fair enough. Another one from Oren really is putting my future children through college for $2. They say, on ice baths, do you think Wim Hof is a charlatan? Do you know who Wim Hof is?
No, but I think he's not the only one promoting the ice baths. Wasn't Dr. Chris Kessler also doing that? Like, what was that doctor was promoting? Like the browning of the fat, basically, staying in a cold environment so you can increase he called it cold thermogenesis.
I don't even want to say his name, but there is a person that does promote that.
So I don't think he's a charlatan, but I think the idea, basically they think that increasing the proportion of brown fat to white fat is a good thing. I don't think that's true because it's done through a stress mechanism, which is an adrenergic mechanism. So anything that promotes the chronic elevation of adrenaline is not likely to be beneficial. I mean, that's the primary method of increasing lipolysis in your body. So higher adrenaline cannot mean good health. And then even if you like the brown fat, just as I mentioned earlier, multiple studies demonstrated that in cancer patients, almost all of the fat converts from white to brown type, and basically they're in a chronic state of adrenergic excess, and they lose weight very well, but not in a good way. And finally, there are multiple studies that show that once lipolysis exceeds a specific threshold, then you can get into a very rapid wasting syndrome, which is similar to cachexia in cancer patients, but not entirely, just by the virtue of having a very high level of lipolysis, uncontrolled. And I think most of these cold thermogenesis sessions that I've seen promoted, they last for hours and they're repeated on a daily basis. And I don't think that's safe. I think you can severely suppress your thyroid gland and your gonadal function, because the gonads are highly sensitive to temperature. They don't like very high temperature, but they certainly don't like low as well. So if you're going to be dipping your body in an ice bath, I don't think this bodes very well for your ovaries and your testicles.
So I have on screen a little mini documentary with Wim Hof, and he's a very charismatic guy. There's definitely more going on with him than just jumping in ice and his breathing method of hyperventilation. But when I was watching it, I specifically noted that one of the people trying his weekend excursion or whatever had a seizure when he was doing his breathing method. So he's not only promoting ice baths, but he's also promotes a very just a powerful hyperventilation therapy where you're blowing out your carbon dioxide. And then there was an article. Find it real fast here. Then there was an article. I forgot where I got this, but it's called "Just Chilling Out" in 2014, and they study him because he's one of the things he's famous for is they injected him with endotoxin, and he was able to like fight it off. And they say, to our surprise, levels of stress hormone adrenaline, the molecule produced in a fight or flight response by the sympathetic nervous system, increased rapidly, a high amount after Hoff started practicing his breathing techniques. He said the results were remarkable. The volunteers trained by Hoff or practiced the breathing techniques during the experiment showed exceptionally high adrenaline levels, even higher than those measured in people bungee jumping for the first time. And he says Hoff also reported almost no flu-like symptoms after being injected with endotoxin, and the levels of cytokines in his blood were less than half of those of a control group of healthy volunteers. So I don't know precisely what's going on there, but my guess would be, and I'd appreciate your 2 cents, is like maybe Wim is doing something about the stress, and that's having some kind of positive effect. But like I don't see him as like some. His whole shtick is like that is preserving him, and it's anti-aging to be in the cold all the time and to be hyperventilating. And I don't see that as being accurate.
Well, I know that well, it's not cryotherapy, but keeping people cold has been tried for multiple diseases, and so far it's actually only the exact opposite that worked: hyperthermia for cancer, for infectious disease, for degenerative diseases like the brain, especially Alzheimer's. These people always complain that they're cold, even when they're really not. When basically outside is, when they're living in Florida in a retirement home and outside is like 85 degrees, they're often wrapped in blankets. So it's just you don't want to be doing anything that will result in the lowering the reset of the core temperature, which is controlled by the brain. You can get yourself in a pretty crappy situation if you reset your internal thermometer to be like even just like a 1 or 2 degrees lower. I don't think that's safe. And again, if this doing anything good, it's probably because you're raising metabolism through the stress response. So to me, cold thermogenesis is akin to exercise. Exercise has a very similar effect.
Good stuff. Okay, Ricky rocks for $5. Thank you so much, Ricky. They say, why do some people who are hypo have a hard time handling heat or even room temperature? I thought the body preferred heat.
It prefers heat, but also like cooling you off also requires energy. And basically, when you don't have energy, just like Ray said, anything is dangerous in a hypothyroid state. So initially, it may feel like you're struggling, but I've noticed. I actually went through a period like that when I was in my paleo days and I was running a lot. There was one winter, I think it was like 2010 going to 2011. I got myself into a situation where I was so cold all the time, and I decided to crank up the heat at home. And then I thought I was going to suffocate that night, but I powered through it. And then that's what kind of improved my health enough to understand and really start believing that, killing myself through overexhaustion. And I was actually practicing the coldness as well. I was running outside in a very cold temperature in nothing but like shorts and tank top. And I was thinking that I was doing myself, I was actually hardening myself up. But that's what led me to the point where one day I woke up and I was basically shivering, even though it was 85 degrees inside the apartment. So that's when I tried to do the 95 degrees for one night. And I had the experience of like, oh my God, I'm going to suffocate. And I wasn't even sweating. I felt like I'm gasping for air. So yes, you will have trouble responding to higher temperatures, but it's important to reset your internal clock, not clock, but like the thermometer to a higher temperature level. And that can be done by exposing yourself to heat. So initially, just like high carbon dioxide, if yours is chronically low and you do the back breathing, for the first few minutes, you may feel like you're suffocating, but after your tissues get saturated with enough carbon dioxide, that feeling passes. It doesn't last very long. Same thing with the intolerance to heat. Yet the intolerance to cold is always there until you correct the thyroid function.
Sweet. Thank you guys so much. You guys are being so generous with the super chats. please stop. Like, I don't know if we're going to be able to get through all of them, but I sincerely appreciate it. But I don't want to keep Georgie too late because it's morning for me and it's the night for him. And so, Georgie, thank you for bearing with us, as always. Okay, well, maybe I should take a little tiny break here. Georgi Dinkov, idealabsdc.com. Follow, go to his shop, boutique supplements for sale there. You can check those out. Twitter.com/hateit. And you did an interview with Quacks. I listened to the first like 10 minutes, but I thought it sounded pretty good, but I haven't checked it out yet. Any other interviews you've done recently?
With Judel, I mean, basically we do like maybe once a month, and I'm starting to do some interviews in Bulgarian because, believe it or not, there's a huge interest right now developing in about raise ideas in Bulgaria, and apparently there's a big group of fans of Ray in Russia, and I actually took his website and translated all of his articles into Russian as well, and that's how the Bulgarians heard about it. But they didn't know about, they actually knew about you, Danny Roddy. They knew about Ray. They didn't know about me. So now they're starting to invite me there to like do interviews in Bulgarian. So we're gonna promote the metabolic ideas there as well. And the Cortisone study was done in Bulgaria. So so there's a lot of, I'm seeing a lot of interest in Eastern Europe about Ray's ideas. Macedonia, some people from Macedonia told me that they're forming like a Ray group, a Ray-Pete face group there. There are people in Greece who've emailed me. There's like a big community on, I think like, was it Corfu? Island Corfu or something? Some kind of a resort community. And they're forming a Facebook group there as well. And I think they're doing like a weekly cookouts where they will basically fry fish in coconut oil or butter. Who else remember? People from, was it Finland? I think there is like a Facebook group being set up there as well, and they're going to try the potato juice. So it's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I think, little by little, these ideas are going mainstream. But through Ray's unique prism, because I haven't heard anybody else talk about the potato juice, but these people know about it in Scandinavian countries, and now they're going to start drinking it there.
Yeah, I see a slow upward trajectory. Especially Yeah, we could talk about this all day, but I think Ray is going to get more popular as people get sick of the follow this diet and you'll be good, and they'll crave a bigger picture of things, and so that's what. And it's slow, it's a lot of information, and it's a lot of flipping different things on their head, But again, that's why I kind of dug into the carnivore stuff, because I think that's like a prime fertile ground for people, one, noticing a reduced rate of metabolism, and then two, being possibly open to new things. And so that's why, unfortunately, that's just like the alt theory of our day is keto, and that keeps popping up again and again and again. And that's why it's even though it's kind of redundant, it's important to continually address that, I feel like, on this show.
The good news is there's nothing else left. So after keto passes the fad, there's only one thing left to try.
But it's got to that point where more people are saying, like, for example, the guy that made a video on Tim and myself, it's just he'll say how totally crazy it is, And what's that old saying? It's like first they call you crazy and then something or other.
Well, first they fight it, then they call you crazy, and eventually they say this truth was with us all along, and they accept it as self-evident.
So yeah, I feel like in 5-10 years maybe that will come true to some degree. Me, I do coaching, DannyRoddy.com/resources on Twitter. You can follow me. I posted something on Obama being a CIA agent. You can check that out. And then I have a Instagram / the Danny Roddy weblog. You can also check that out. And we'll try doing callers one more time towards the end. Okay, so let's finish up these super chats. John Knight for $25. Thank you so much, John. Sincerely appreciate that. He says, thanks for all your hard work and research you do, Danny, and the great guests you share with us. You're appreciated. Thank you so much, John. Sincerely appreciate it. Thank you to Georgi for making this possible. I will be doing these solo, but I enjoy doing them with a guest. And so the fact that Georgi leaves his wife and children to come do this for us, and he has a busy life, he's the real MVP in all this. So sincerely appreciate that, Georgi. Again,
so if next show my wife shows up instead of me and says this is over,
this is done.
Yes.
Yeah. Oren, again for $2, best protein source, protein powder for a strict vegan.
Well, I just mentioned that you look at the synchronicity striking again. What about the potato juice? We're actually doing analysis with the lab that I'm working with, that we're synthesizing some cool new chemicals, but they also do an analysis of like the composition of things that are in nature. And I remember Ray said that if he had the financial resources, he wanted to do an analysis of basically the protein and the keto acid composition of plants, especially leaves and like green leafy vegetables. So we're going to get to that. We're not there yet. I know strawberry leaves are very high on keto acids, but we're going to check the protein juice. And we already tested, and it's very high on the keto acid equivalent of leucine, which bodybuilders spend a ton of money. And there's also a metabolite of leucine known as HMB, which is even more expensive. So in terms of if you're going to be, if you want like a highly anabolic protein source, I would say the potato juice will be the best because it's almost 100% utilized, and it generates no ammonia, no byproducts. In fact, it will lower your ammonia, and that's how the keto acids will get converted back to amino acids. So that would be my choice. And if not, then I think well-cooked green leaves would probably be pretty close because of their high contents of keto acids. And then other than that, I think casein would be my next choice because not only it's a slowly digestible protein, but casein is known to have a direct anti-stress effect, and nobody has been able to figure it out so far. How exactly does it work? They thought it was through the opioid system, but then researchers said, well, it can't be true because anything that activates the opioid receptors increases endorphins and basically activates the stress response over time. But casein is known to stop the stress response. So there's something about casein that's really pro-metabolic and anti-stress. So if I have to choose an actual protein, dairy, especially cheeses, would be my choice.
But not for vegan. So the potato would be
potato
would be the best.
Potato and well cooked green leaves, because that would be the second richest source of keto acids. Probably even richer than potatoes, but you have to eat a lot of like leaf green mass cooked in order to get to that level. While the potato juice is easy to eat because it's just it's a very high concentration of keto acids. And it's easier to ingest a much bigger amount of it and it's easier to prepare. The leaves you have to cook for a long time in order to destroy these anti-digestive enzymes that are in them and get them to a point where they will be easily assimilated by your digestive system.
Good stuff. And mushrooms are another source of protein. Chris H says
Yes.
for I think Australian $5.99. Thank you so much, Chris. He says this could be a long one, so we'll try to do an elevator pitch. Thoughts on DHA and the many benefits shown in studies.
Okay, so the quick version is, first of all of the studies that tracked chronic administration of DHA in humans found much higher rates of melanoma and of highly aggressive prostate cancer. So if you go to Google right now, if you type fish oil melanoma or fish oil aggressive prostate cancer, you'll immediately get these studies. And it's not just one or two. There are multiple studies like that. If there are any benefits to DHA, it's largely by competing for the enzymes cyclooxygenase and lipoxygenase with arachidonic acid, and the prostaglandins and the leukotriene varieties that are synthesized from DHEA happen to be less inflammatory than the ones synthesized from arachidonic acid. That's about it. But it's actually more unsaturated than arachidonic acid and the omega-6, and as such, actually, it pushes it makes the cell even more hydrophilic. So in terms of a signaling function, fish oil if it's not rancid yet because it's peroxidized so easily, fish oil actually has more. It's probably more dangerous than even the omega-6 fatty acids because of its signaling effects. And basically, it's known that the most effective way to raise the levels of malondialdehyde, which is both a biomarker of lipid peroxidation and a highly pro-atherogenic chemical itself, it gives you heart disease directly, is the most effective way of raising that is by consuming DHA specifically. EPA was a close second, and then the omega-6 were third. But if you want to raise your malondialdehyde levels through the roof, take DHA as a supplement.
Yeah, and this is one of my favorite papers. It's by Prasad. It's a reference from Ray. It's 2010, and they say, and an increase in intracellular calcium is the first event to occur upon, I think, exposing the cells to omega-3. And they said these results suggest that the 6 PUFAs were studied kill thymocytes by causing release of calcium from endoplasmic reticulum, which causes a release of RS from mitochondria, which leads to cell death. And the money quote is, "It is perhaps surprising that essential lipids that are supposed to be so good for health are so potent at killing cells."
And last, yeah, go ahead.
And then Kyle, who's somebody who has a lot of experience in this stuff, he says that and we've talked about this ad nauseum, but it's like a word game. Sometimes something will be less inflammatory than the thing it's compared to, and then it will be called anti-inflammatory. And like you said, it can interfere with the production of the prostaglandins via the cyclooxygenase. So it's a sticky situation.
And one example that I always give to people is, remember that in India back in like the 60s and 70s, they were treating alcoholism by basically putting people under strict orders to avoid eating any kind of a fish or any kind of unsaturated fat, and we're putting them on a diet high on saturated fat. And then this guy Nanji, who I think looked at these like ethnical, uncontrolled studies, and then he did his own. And the group that he used to create liver disease, or at least exacerbate it, always had fish oil, right? So he had these alcoholic rats and mice and hamsters, and then one group was coconut oil, another one was like beef tallow, right? And then he always had a group with either corn oil or fish oil, and invariably the one that was given fish oil did the worst.
Unbelievable.
So it's highly hepatotoxic, highly liver toxic. It's not something you want to give to your liver.
And I think this idea is also starting to permeate that omega-3s are inherently problematic. Okay.
Look at the study we just discussed today, vitamin E reversing liver disease in HIV patients. Well, vitamin E and DHA are pretty much 180-degree opposite in their effects. And probably the main effect of vitamin E is blocking this peroxidation of the fish oil and lowering the levels of malondialdehyde. That's probably 80% of its benefit. So if that was good for the liver, think about what DHA would do.
And I think DHA is the precursor for acrolein, which you will not read any good things about. Okay, Vicky Lashenko, who's a great human being, total pleasure communicating with her for $9.99. She says, "What is the reason teeth demineralize? My daughter is 2 and her teeth are falling apart. I'm nursing her, have Hashimoto's, not taking thyroid yet, estrogen dominant, both take vitamin D and K2.
Well, it just hit the nail on the head. I mean, basically, a study that I posted about 4 years ago showed that elite professional athletes have extremely poor dental health, and they tracked it to basically severely suppress thyroid as a result of the overexertion that these athletes have. So thyroid function is likely the primary cause. Low carbon dioxide is actually probably the direct cause, because ultimately, without carbon dioxide, you cannot form new bone, and potentially endotoxin is involved as well, because of like low thyroid and low carbon dioxide. So if you don't want to take the thyroid, if she's too young, then things that raise the carbon dioxide would be my second best choice. Would be like methylene blue, B1, like baking soda in orange juice. It's probably a very easy way to do that, and tends to be well tolerated. Things like that.
Again, I have no experience with the issue, but Broda Barnes does write about child hypothyroidism and using like a fourth of grain for kids. So that's not out of the that's not something that hasn't been explored by him, and he mentions that in his book. But again, I don't have children, so I wouldn't know. Have you read about that?
Peripherally, but so one of the I think if you don't want to give your child thyroid directly, you can do the chicken neck or fish head soup. And I've had multiple reports from clients that are doing this for their children because doctor doesn't want to prescribe thyroid, and they're saying it works remarkably well. Basically, they got to the point where they're now saying like one lady put too many chicken necks into the bowl, and when she cooked them, basically got so potent that she said that 1 tablespoon of the liquid, it was basically the equivalent of probably of a grain of thyroid, because the child was sweating profusely for the next 24 hours. So now they're giving a lot less. So you can actually create your own pretty potent thyroid supplement at home just by boiling the turkey or chicken necks, or fish heads.
Yeah, Broda says that hopelessly lazy kids could be made more productive by taking thyroid. Okay, thank you so much, Vicky. Sincerely appreciate it. Oren again. Best aromatase inhibitors, herbal or otherwise. Good night.
Best aromatase inhibitors herbal are probably white button mushrooms and or nettle root, and they can be used together. And in terms of things that are more on the dietary side, aspirin and vitamin E are known to do that. Zinc is also known to inhibit aromatase, but I don't want to overdo the zinc because it can cause trouble. It can actually increase oxidative. It can increase lipid peroxidation, especially if your tissues have a high amount of PUFA in them. And in order for zinc to start inhibiting aromatase, you have to be taking 30 to 50 milligrams daily. And I've confirmed with Ray, he thinks that's a massive dose as a supplement. It shouldn't be taken. And then progesterone is a known one. Any saturated steroids such as androsterone or dihydrotestosterone, they're all aromatase inhibitors as well. And in general, keeping the inflammation low and cortisol low is in and of itself an aromatase inhibitor, because those two things, cortisol and inflammatory mediators such as the prostaglandins and the leukotrienes, these are activators of the enzyme aromatase. Eating more saturated fat helps too. Oleic acid is actually a known aromatase inhibitor. I think stearic acid, mostly found in butter and beef products, is also a known aromatase inhibitor. So there are plenty of them, but the most potent ones on the dietary side are probably actually any mushroom, but specifically white button mushrooms. You can boil them and drink the juice. Nettle root and vitamin E would be my first three choices, and aspirin.
Sweet. Eli says for $2, thank you, Eli. He says, Georgie, your Yeti microphone logo needs to face you. But I'm pretty sure you can have a setting on that thing where you can turn it and it will make all the microphone around active.
What do you mean?
It's called carotid or whatever. I don't know. We shouldn't waste time on this. Thank you, Elliot. Sincerely appreciate it. People always think your microphone is backwards because it's supposed to face you where the controls are, but there's an option on the back that you can make the whole thing pick up the sound.
Okay, but here's the thing: like if I turn it like this, and then if I do this. Then the controls are underneath.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't sound right.
It does sound different, but
like I shouldn't be reaching under because right now I don't even see the controls, right? So if I want to do the controls, I have to be actually lifting the microphone to see like the whether it's muted and the gain, right?
What you have right there sounds the best.
Like this? Okay.
Whatever.
Well, right now it's not facing me; it's facing upwards.
Okay. It honestly doesn't matter because I don't have an issue with the sound. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Georgie, for exploring that super chat. Jaeger ODA for $1.99 says, "Is there an upper limit for pregnenolone intake?"
I don't think so, but what happens is after a while, basically the levels of allopregnanolone rise to the point that starts to become sedating. I've experimented with pregnenolone doses of several grams daily, and after 500 milligrams, so up to 500 milligrams, it has a stimulating effect on me, and after that, I start getting really drowsy and like discoordinated, which is a sign of increased GABA activity. And that's what allopregnanolone does as well, and progesterone. So in higher dosages, the pregnenolone starts to favor the progesterone and, ergo the allopregnanolone route, and not so much the DHEA one. So after, you probably don't want to overdo it. Not because it's going to harm you in any way, but it becomes more of a calming substance in higher dosages. It starts to mimic progesterone the more you take of it. So in terms of supporting androgen synthesis, in my experience, actually 30 to 50 milligrams is best. Anything over that is probably good for opposing estrogen, which it has been known to do. There are older French studies showing that 500 milligrams of pregnenolone were capable of fully blocking the effects of the highly potent synthetic estrogen DES. The diethylstilbestrol, I think is the name. Well, speaking of resveratrol, diethylstilbestrol, that's another synthetic estrogen, very, very potent. So really depends on what you're trying to achieve. For general androgen support, 30 to 50 milligrams daily. For opposing estrogen and supporting male fertility, up to 500 milligrams daily. Rheumatoid arthritis, many autoimmune conditions used between 200 and 500 milligrams daily. Anything above that starts to become more of a sedating drug.
Your microphone actually sounds like way better. So that
by pointing upwards.
Yeah, that was the ticket. Ellie, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds just like more like radio broadcast.
More crisp.
Sounds very good. Okay, Gabriel Taraushi, I'm sure I butchered your last name, for $10. Thank you so much, Gabriel. He says, had about a food poisoning, horrendous experience. What can be done if someone is experiencing this? Can you recommend any anti-nausea substances, natural, over-the-counter, or prescription? Thank you.
Well, if there's food poisoning, probably the best remedy is charcoal. In my experience, anti-serotonin chemicals help as well a lot, both for the nausea and for the actual effects of the food poisoning. I guess since most people don't have access to cyproheptadine, in terms of anti-serotonin chemicals, famotidine, which is sold as an anti-acid drug, has repeatedly been shown to also have a very potent anti-serotonin effect as well. So you can get it from any store in the United States. You just go and ask for Pepsid, or just ask the pharmacist for famotidine. They'll show you where it's sold. You can probably find it on the shelves as well. And that, like I said, for food poisoning. And then I've also noticed that I was reading on specific techniques in Ayurveda for treating food poisoning, and they actually they give like a higher dosage of coconut oil because it increases gastric motility. So basically, if there's anything stuck in your gastrointestinal tract, if you take like an ounce, it's quite a bit. But if you take an ounce of, let's say, coconut oil, apparently that's enough to trigger like a cleansing effect. You'll be running to the bathroom, but it helps get rid of the whatever it is that you ingested that's causing trouble.
Thank you so much for that super chat, Gabriel. And I've had food poisoning twice eating raw oysters, and both times I just kind of let it happen. I think I took more aspirin, and that was like the only thing I could do. HTMM for $5 says, what the best drug for hyperprolactinemia? I have a prolactinoma and dealing with a lot of constipation when on cabergoline. The levels are around 400, which 400 divided by 21.2 is almost 20.
Yeah. Well, no, I think 400 is basically if you have a prolactinoma, the 400 is in the same units that we use here in the States. So basically over 100, usually the doctor suspects prolactinoma. 400 is most certainly due to prolactinoma. Between 20 and 50 is usually caused by stress, kidney or liver disease in that order. Between 50 and 100 is probably the beginning stages of prolactinoma. They call it microprolactinoma. And many times the MRI cannot even detect it because it's that small. And over 100 is already formed to the point where the MRI can see it. But there are other, basically there are multiple drugs that act on dopamine that can be used as a treatment. Cabergoline is notorious for causing the constipation, but also it's a very dangerous drug because of all the ergot derivatives, such as, they're all derivatives LSD. Cabergoline is the most potent agonist on the 5-HT2B receptor, and as such has the highest risk of fibrosis of the heart and the lungs, and actually the gastrointestinal tract as well. So I would be very, very careful with cabergoline. I don't think there's any reason to use cabergoline, considering that the safer version known as bromocriptine is also available. And then if you don't tolerate that well, there is metergoline and methysergide are two other drugs that are also LSD derivatives that seem to be tolerated much better. And if those don't work, there are multiple dopamine agonists that are approved that are more recent. And I think the most common one, the most popular one, is pramipexole. And it has been successfully used for treating prolactinomas. And as far as I know, it doesn't cause nausea, and it doesn't. Well, not that I know, but it's not listed as one of its side effects. And I don't think constipation is listed as a side effect either. I think that's what doctors give to people when cannot tolerate one of the ergot drugs.
Yeah, and again, the high prolactin is likely a response to some degree of hypothyroidism. In this Siri paper in 2003, they detail it. They say an excess of prolactin above a reference laboratory's upper limits or biochemical hyperprolactinemia can be identified in up to 10% of the population. And men with
estrogen.
Yeah, and men with hypogonadism, impotence, or infertility must have serum prolactin measured. And then furthermore, primary hypothyroidism can be associated with diffuse pituitary enlargement, which will reverse with appropriate thyroid hormone replacement therapy. And so again, it's like the drugs. Yeah.
The ultimate direct cause of prolactin elevation is always estrogen. Sometimes, in very rare cases, cortisol. People with Cushing syndrome tend to have elevated prolactin as well. But in animal studies, whenever they're trying to raise prolactin levels, they always inject the animals with estrogen, estradiol benzoate. That's like the standard way of causing hyperprolactinemia. So usually the prolactinoma is a result of years of being exposed to like chronically elevated estrogen levels. So if those haven't been checked, I would check them. But of course, the fact that prolactin is high is already a sign that estrogen is elevated. That's another thing to consider. It's giving you ideas. If you may ask the doctor for an aromatase inhibitor if prolactin is that high, or try things that are known to block estrogen, like progesterone, for example. I think in some countries in Europe, actually dihydrotestosterone is approved for treating gynecomastia, and in the vast majority of cases, the gynecomastia is driven by hyperprolactin. So the DHT, by blocking estrogen, probably has an effect on the prolactin as well, because it's known to treat the gynecomastia. So that's another thing to discuss with the doctor. Maybe like a fully reduced non-aromatizable androgen would also be an option.
Yeah. Estrogen affects almost every conceivable aspect of prolactin production. ... From a Litwack paper in 1985. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that super chat. Sincerely appreciate it. That was from HTMM. Oren again for $5 says, for Danny's future child fund. Cheers, mate. Thank you, Oren. Sincerely appreciate it. Shafael Anauer for $4.99. Thank you so much, Shafael. They say, I live in New York City and have to take the subway. Any remedies to deal with the subway low quality light and toxics around me?
I actually personally like aspirin and methylene blue. And the reason is a study that came out showed that most of the pollutants in the air and even the endocrine disruptors can be quickly destroyed by reactive oxygen species. And they did an in vivo study in which they elevated the levels of these reactive oxygen species by administering hydrogen peroxide. Well, hydrogen peroxide, instead of taken as a supplement, you can actually increase its levels simply by increasing metabolism, because it's a byproduct of high mitochondrial function. So thyroid would work, methylene blue would work, aspirin would work. I personally like the aspirin and methylene blue combination because they have other benefits, such as both are known to inhibit estrogen and prolactin, and many of these endocrine disruptors that are floating around us are estrogen agonists. So that would be that's my remedy. But in general, keeping metabolism high so that ROS levels are high tends to prevent the damage of most of these toxic particulates around us, and even prevent viral infections. Not many people know, but a standard methylene blue is actually a standard treatment in scientific studies in vitro against almost any kind of virus. Fish enthusiasts use it to sterilize the tanks, but it's used not only as an antibacterial and antifungal, but also as an antiviral. And Pfizer, as many of your listeners have heard me say before, Pfizer patented a photodynamic therapy approach using methylene blue and red light for basically as a highly effective form of antiviral therapy, regardless of the type of the virus. And they said that they don't think the viruses can actually develop a resistance to this therapy simply because it acts in such a general way, generates reactive oxygen species, and no known organism, microorganism, is known to have a resistance to that.
Thank you so much, Carlin Brooks, for, let me make sure I'm zooming. Carlin Brooks for $20. Thank you so much, Carlin. That's very generous of you. Thank you for that. Carlin has another super chat for $5, and they say, a friend recently had her appendix removed. What do you think the root cause might be, and what does she need to do in order to support her microbiome?
Endotoxin is perhaps the direct cause of appendicitis in at least 90% of the cases. And now I think the I don't know what the association is. There's like a doctors association of surgeons that deal with appendicitis. They recently changed their guidelines, and now they're saying unless the appendix has ruptured, they don't recommend surgery anymore. Now they recommend a round of antibiotics. And it used to be only intravenous antibiotics, and now they're saying even oral antibiotics would work. Combined with cortisol treatment, which is a standard therapy for endotoxemia. So that strongly points to endotoxin being the cause. So if you have an issue, if you're starting to feel like discomfort in the appendix area, maybe a round of antibiotics is in order. And in terms of her recovering from the surgery, just keeping the metabolism high and the immune function high and cortisol low is probably the best method. So if the doctors have prescribed steroids, I'll be careful with those and try to do things like pregnenolone / progesterone instead, because they can do everything that these steroids can in terms of anti-inflammatory effects, but they, unlike the cortisol that the hospital gives you, the pregnenolone and progesterone don't suppress the immune system.
Thank you for that, Georgi, and thank you for that, Carlin. Also, Functional Performance Systems, they did like a aggregation of a lot of different quotes and papers about exactly what you just said, the appendicitis being related to endotoxin and serotonin. So if you type in Functional Performance Systems appendicitis, you'll find that pretty quickly. Kirk333 for $5 says, "Hi guys, y'all rock. What is the best way, life/food, to fix adrenal overactivity, gonadal hypoactivity, and chronic stress?"
Well, they're all related. I mean, it's really, there's no like, each one of these can cause the other, right? So it's like at the core, at the very bottom is the stress. So it really depends what's causing that stress. If it's environmental, then try to avoid that stressor as much as possible. If that's not an option, usually controlling the effects of serotonin tends to put a brake on most of the detrimental effects of stress. I mean, cyproheptadine is, if you look at the studies on PubMed, is now enjoying a sort of a renaissance. And that's probably one of the reasons why it has disappeared from the market. Right now, if you try to buy cyproheptadine in the United States, if you try to get a doctor to prescribe it, they'll refuse, not because they don't want to prescribe it, because they'll check the database and it will show that it's not available anywhere. So you can only get it from a compounding pharmacy, and most doctors don't like to work with those. You cannot get cyproheptadine from a regular pharmacy. They just don't have it. Only hospitals have it because they treat serotonin syndrome with it. And now they found out that post-surgical delirium is actually mostly due to serotonin. So hospitals stock up on cyproheptadine. But another one, which I mentioned over the counter, would be famotidine. There'll be another way to keep serotonin at bay. And aspirin is now known, and there was a recent study. It's not now, but it's the evidence is accumulated to the point where now they're saying that aspirin can probably prevent most of the detrimental effects of chronic stress on the brain. And as long as you're protecting the brain from the effects of chronic stress, the other systems should be more or less operating as they should be, instead of going into chronic adrenal overactivity and hypogonadism. Now, there is, of course, the option that there is a problem with the gonads, but that can be easily done. You can be easily verified with some blood tests. Check the levels of pituitary hormones, LH and FSH, check prolactin, and then, of course, levels of testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. If there is an issue with the gonads themselves, LH/FSH will be high, or at least close to the upper range, and then the testosterone and the dihydrotestosterone will be either close to the lower end of normal or even below normal. In that case, then the doctor has to do an ultrasound of the gonads and see what's going on there. It's called that will be a case of primary hypogonadism, but that tends to be rare. In most cases, it's usually stress causing elevated estrogen, and estrogen suppresses gonadal function.
Yeah, and to tag along with what you said, if there was like one food to maybe cover multiple different bases, it would be something to disinfect the intestine. So either mushrooms or a carrot or bamboo. And that always made a huge impression on me. I remember somebody writing to Ray having like a long battery of issues, and him thinking, writing back that he thought the most easily correctable thing was probably the intestine, and that would have a ripple like effect in all the person's other problems.
Right.
Thank you so much, Kirk. Thank you, Georgi. Last one, Vicky Lashenko for $199. Thank you so much, Vicky. Where can I access Pete's stuff in Russian and yay?
Okay, let me just. I'll have to send you the link. Let me just turn on the light again.
Guys, thank you so much. Raj, I did see your thing here. I'm scrolling up, and I really want to take a call. That's why I'm trying to get through these quickly. You're describing, like, it sounds like typical low thyroid function, especially the pubertal gyno, like that. I have papers that talk about that's correctable with thyroid therapy in a person's youth. Hair loss in your 20s. Every single time I've talked to somebody in their 20s losing hair, it was like a mixture of intestinal problems and low vitamin D, low thyroid function. And so I think just trying to, again, evaluate the life and correct as many things as possible based on what seems to need immediate attention is really the only thing to do there. And that's individual and kind of empirical for the person to decide. Yeah,
I'll have to send you the link. I mean, I have it, but I'm in the office, and that's on my home computer. There is a link that's basically, they have like most of the articles in Russian.
Sweet. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vicky. Okay, so let's try one more call, and Georgi and I will chat, and then I'll let him go because I know it's super late there. Georgi, what time is it in DC?
It's 12:07.
Okay, you know what? Never mind. We'll just skip the call. Georgi, thank you so much. Let's do one more thing. I didn't even realize it was so late. Like, as I'm waking up, it's time to go. Okay, let me switch views here. Okay, Georgi Dinkov, idealabsdc.com. Go check it out. That's Georgi's boutique supplement company. Follow Georgi on Twitter at twitter.com/hateit. I do coaching, DannyRoddy.com/resources. You can follow me on Twitter at DannyRoddy, me on Instagram. Georgi, parting words?
Well, it's going to be an interesting year. I mean, there are quite a few things that I have that I have already in motion that we should have some good verification of many of Ray's metabolic ideas. I think you and I talked about just before we got on air about essential fatty acid depletion. I already have a setup that should be able to do that, and we can get into, like, if that works, then this can morph into an anti-aging / lifespan extension study. There's a lot of interest in that. Anything else? I mean, I have a few new products in the works. One of them will probably be released this month, or at least at most within the next month. It's a fatty acid oxidation inhibitor, similar to the drug mildronate, but it's much more potent. And I'm also working on a serotonin antagonist, and also like an herbal extract that should be able to mimic the effects of testosterone, almost like an herbal tea replacement, herbal TRT. It's based on Tribulus terrestris, but we're purifying the extract to the point where it only contains one or two of the active ingredients, and it's that thing hasn't been done before because it's very hard to purify. But we found a way to do it, so that's what the lab one of the things the lab is currently working on. So I'm pretty excited about that too, because if you look at the studies, all the studies that are from non-Western journals are gloating about. They're not gloating, but like they're beaming about the effects of Tribulus, and they're human studies as well. But if you go to the Wikipedia page about Tribulus, that's mostly written by doctors in the Western world, it says it's ineffective. But actually, the evidence is overwhelmingly pointing to towards one or two of the ingredients inside the tribulus and other herbs contain them as well as being very effective precursors to DHEA and dihydrotestosterone. So we should be able to do something interesting with that. But yeah, many interesting things going on. So so many studies being planned as well. So it'll come down to funding and time.
And of course, you're going to be back here on the 6th with our special Reiki
right.
episode. And then one just logistical question about the chicken necks. People are asking that the thyroid is usually removed from the chicken necks, right? Or no?
No, you can get it. I mean, depends. If you get it from a regular commercial store, like if you go to Whole Foods and Safeway, most likely it will be. But if you go to like a butcher store or an ethnic store, you can actually get the neck with the thyroid gland still in it. I mean, I have there's a store like 2 blocks from where I live. It's a Latin American store. And then if you go inside, they have a section with, I mean, nobody's buying these. They're actually buying them to feed them to their dogs and, and their cats. So they're really cheap too. And I specifically asked, and the guy gave me the look. Is like, when I asked him, like, is the thyroid removed? He just said like that I'm loco or something. He's like, well, why would we do that? And I said, well, I don't know. The other stores, he's like, no, anything you get here is the full organs inside. So that's where I get mine from. So any ethnic store that sells like, organ meats and like necks, turkey or chicken and whatnot should be able to have that. And you can actually buy the actual thyroid gland from like a lamb or like a veal or like a small calf. If you go to like an ethnic store that has these kind of meats, you can ask for it. I mean, if they sell veal liver, chances are they can also sell you a thyroid gland extracted from the animal as well, because they keep them.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much. Next week, Tim Burzins, then Ray Pete, then I'll do a solo show, as you can see on the screen. You guys are amazing. Very fortunate to have a very intelligent, active audience, so thank you guys for making that possible. Thank you, Georgi Dinkov, for spending time away from your family and joining us and just gracing us with your knowledge, so sincerely appreciate that. Again, thank you guys so much. We'll announce 2 winners next time, or maybe not at that repeat episode. We'll kind of play it by ear. But anyways, we'll give away 2 Tokovits at some point. Guys, thank you guys so much. Sincerely appreciate it. Have a safe weekend, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.